Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm calling the 443rd Council meeting to order. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Council members, please have your video on during the meeting and mute yourself if you are not speaking. We are live streaming this meeting through the RCDSO's YouTube channel so that members of the public, profession, and other stakeholders can watch our proceedings. Please use your Zoom hands for voting, questions, and comments. I would like to turn to the official opening of our meeting with a land acknowledgement. The RCDSO is on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. These traditional lands are known to some as Toronto. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between allied nations to peaceably share and care for this land. We accept our responsibility to each other and this land we live on and work on in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We are committed to actively supporting the necessary work towards truth, reconciliation, and equity. We embrace the role we play in regulating dentists, in protecting the public interest, and in strengthening our partnerships with Indigenous communities to advance access to safe and equitable oral health. Thank you. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to the Registrar and CEO, Dan Faulkner, for the Council roll call. Dan, please.
Thank you, Hanno. Council, I will, as usual, go in alphabetical order, so be prepared with your mute button. Nalan Bhargava.
Present.
David Bishop. Okay, David doesn't appear to be here. Amelia Chan. Amelia doesn't appear to be here. Ram Chopra.
Present.
Jamie Colliver.
Present.
Christina Cordero. I saw Christina.
She's there, yeah.
She's
Her
here.
hand
Okay.
is up. Yes.
Thank you. Peter Delane.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Nancy DeSanto.
Present.
Mark Eckler.
Present.
Ellie Fisher.
Present.
Noha Goma sent her regrets. Daniel Haas.
Present.
Vivian Hu.
Present.
Nizar Ladak. I don't have everyone on my screen. I don't think Nizar is here.
No,
Anthony
I'm here.
Lish-
Can you hear me?
There you are, Nizar. Thank you very
Sorry.
much. Anthony Licio. Sorry, I don't see everyone, so if you can please.
He's there, yeah.
Thank you.
Present,
Thank you.
present.
Anthony Mayer.
Present.
Harinder Sandhu.
Present.
Brian Smith.
Present.
Osama Solomon has sent regrets. Robin Somerville.
Present.
Rod Stapleforth has sent regrets. Mark Trudell.
Good morning, present.
Aaron Walker.
Present.
Judy Welikovich.
Present.
And Deborah Wilson.
Present.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Hanno. Back to you.
Thank you, Dan. At this point in time, I'd like to move to the declaration of conflicts of interest. Conflicts are important to declare because of our public interest mandate and as a standard reflected in the Ministry of Health College Performance Measurement Framework. And just a reminder that we continue to work with PricewaterhouseCoopers on the PLP investment project. If there are any members of council who feel they have a conflict of interest, real or perceived, to declare on any of the agenda items discussed today, please indicate so now by raising your virtual hand. Seeing none, I'm going to go to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. Just a reminder to council, we're continuing to use a consent agenda as a time-saving mechanism. On the consent agenda are several items that are for council's information, acceptance, and ratification. Council will be asked to approve these in one motion. Council may ask clarifying questions about an item on the consent agenda, But if anyone wishes to have a deeper discussion about an item, we will take it out of the consent agenda and address it later on in our meeting. I would ask, though, that you use a very high threshold when asking to remove an item from the consent agenda. The consent agenda items are in your meeting materials from pages 18 to 104. Are there any questions about an item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, could I have motion number 1 on the screen, please? And motion number 1 is that the following items be approved and or received for information by council: approval of agenda, approval of RCDSO council meeting minutes, May 9th, 2024, council evaluation survey results, May 9th, 2024, registrar and CEO report, RCDSO council work plan 2024, 2024 council meeting program, financial update, and policy report. And I think I saw Vivian's hand first as the mover, seconded by Mark Eckler. All those in favor, please indicate by using your virtual hand. And that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the registrar and CEO's remarks. And Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you now, please.
Thank you, Hanno. I just wanted to defer. I'm not sure if we've missed the president's remark.
Yes,
Sorry.
it's okay.
My
I-
apologies.
I'm
I'm
prepared.
jumping ahead. I guess I'm trying to be too time efficient. My apologies, please. Harinder, you are right. It is your turn to speak in terms of the president's remarks.
Not at all. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah, and good morning, everyone. I would like to acknowledge that it is Pride Month, where we celebrate the 2SLGBTQ community. It is also Indigenous History Month, and tomorrow is National Indigenous Peoples Day. These important events remind us to reflect on our work toward inclusivity in all aspects of our lives. These important events remind us to reflect on our work toward inclusivity in all aspects of our lives. And so, welcome to our second half-day meeting of 2024. Thank you for your good feedback in regard to the May meeting. It seems that it is not only the shorter time, but also the cadence of meeting that is helping council feel more engaged. I think it is a sign of a healthy group that we are now able to have deeper and broader discussions about issues. I do agree that it is important, as we raised, that we focus on issues at the council and strategic level. Council raised a few key issues about the time of discussion and the need for more background information. We appreciate that. Staff have, for example, added more information about balance billing to the college website. Though it has been less than 2 months since we met, it has continued to be a busy spring. I'm going to highlight a few new news items for you. As you may be aware, that CDC eligibility criteria is expanding. On June 27th, Canadians under 18th, as well as those with a disability tax certificate, are able to apply to the program. Over 2 million seniors have been approved and are starting to receive care. On July 8th, dentists will no longer need to register and can instead just direct bill Sun Life. The program will continue to improve over time, and I'm encouraged by how many new patients are being seen. On the subject of access to care, Dan and I were invited to a meeting earlier this month with the Premier and the Minister of Health. Along with the RCDSO, representatives from the other oral health colleges were there. Lisa Bentley from ODA, as well as the Ontario Fairness Commissioner, were there as well. It was a good discussion focused on how we can improve access to care across the province. We discussed systemic approaches like health human resources, and we discussed successful tactics such as mobile dental care. The minister and the premier were open to strategic coordinated suggestions for how we can collectively expand the number of Ontarians who have good oral health care. It is important to note that collaboration and coordination are critical. They are seeking solutions. For example, they're open to bringing at proposals to increase access to the profession for international trained dentists to mitigate shortages. Moving to a more college-focused topic, you will see in your package that staff and the procurement review group are making good progress toward the divestment of the professional liability program. We will continue to report to you, to the profession, and to the PLP staff. There may be times in the process where for competitive and privacy reasons, we may not be able to update you, but the key milestones will be communicated. And then finally, I want to highlight the important work that the governance committee has been doing. Since founding, they have been focused on a thoughtful and researched approach to governance modernization. I look forward to hearing from you on this topic. It is central to our work as governors in the public interest. And one last note, I would like to recognize all the work it takes to get us together in this virtual room. Thanks to everyone involved in preparing us for this meeting. You help us focus on council matters. Dan, the senior leadership team, and the entire staff, thank you for all you do every day. Council, as always, your wisdom and guidance is valuable. Thank you for being here today. To all of those who are joining us via YouTube channel, thank you for your interest. With that, Hannah, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Harinder, and my sincere apologies for the oversight.
Not at all.
If we look at our agenda, we've already addressed items 4 and 5. So at this point in time, I will move on to item 6 on the agenda. That's Dan and the registrar and CEO's remarks. Dan.
Thank you, Hanno, and good morning, Council. I know that there is always a lot of work happening and a lot of challenges, and we discuss some very significant issues. I'm going to condense my report and maybe try to even take us into the summer months on some very positive notes. And I want to first mention that, and I won't have slides today. I know we have a very busy agenda, but first I want to mention the national work that's going on. It is a great pleasure to report to you on a lot of really positive initiatives and relationships that are happening with all of our national partners. Starting off with the Royal College of Dentists of Canada and the National Dental Specialty Examination, there has been significant work to really overhaul the examination and continuing to look at the areas of competencies and blueprints, but really changing the landscape on the delivery and the fees and the capacity for bilingual examinations and the appeals processes, all done within the last year, essentially. And 2 days ago on June 18th, the NDSE was administered to over 150 candidates in 24 sites in Canada and the USA, and all candidates completed the exam. And so we will hear more, obviously, about some of the challenges of that day, but some really tremendous and significant work that's happening that I know was of great interest to this college and all the colleges across the country over the last 5 years or more. With respect to accreditation and CDAC, a new CEO has been hired at CDAC. The board is really focusing on a lot of the issues that have been raised over the last few years. Of note from RCDSO and the dental regulatory authorities, we've talked about the value of the fees that we pay, which is quite significant and noted in my report to you. Ensuring that the operations of CDAC are effective and efficient so that those fees are proportionate, and also looking at the transparency of accreditation reports. And having come from a meeting in the early part of June, I'm cautiously optimistic that they are aware of and addressing all of these issues. So more to come, but obviously some good work that's starting to emerge from that group as well. And finally, with respect to the National Dental Examination Board of Canada, a major commitment to reducing the time that it takes for internationally trained dentists to complete the equivalency process. And that, for those public members or others who aren't aware, is a series of examinations for internationally trained dentists. And the NDEB is really trying to ensure that that can be done as quickly as is possible, obviously evaluating the competencies of the individuals. And they're doing that in a number of ways, including increasing the seat capacity at the examinations and setting priorities for who gets access to those examination seats, which is really helpful in reducing timelines as we've been watched by various parties within Ontario. In terms of government interactions, there have been several in the last few months. Our president, Dr. Sandhu, mentioned the meeting earlier this month with the Premier and the Minister of Health. I am the chair of the Health Professions Regulators of Ontario group, which is our federation of 26 health professionals. And earlier this month, we also were very honored to have the Minister of Health come to address that group. And she talked about the issues that we hear about quite frequently, that the ministry and the government's focus is on access to care, ensuring that professions are working within the full scope of their practice, and ensuring that the patient experience is always positive. And that includes how we are as health professionals working effectively as teams and team-based care. So a lot of those messages obviously are ones that we have heard and ones that we are carefully considering in the strategic opportunities for the college. There have also been some meetings with college staff and the Ministry of Health and the Office of the Fairness Commissioner. There have been a number of issues raised with this college and others in terms of our ability to work with national examination bodies and ministries on issues like labor supply and health human resources. And we've had some very positive meetings with the Ontario Fairness Commissioner and the Ministry of Health. They're very pleased with our results on registration. And they're also very pleased with our work with the National Dental Examining Board of Canada to really try to ensure that the internationally trained dentist experience, as I mentioned before, is positive. In-house, in the college, at a staff level, there's a lot of work always happening. I have provided you with our corporate dashboard report. It's on pages 78 to 94 of your materials. Just to remind you, and I'm not going to go into this report in any way, but you have that information before you. We report to you on key metrics. These are priorities that we are looking at to drive improvements in certain areas. So it's a very concentrated look. We obviously look at a lot more metrics internally, and we also retire metrics when we believe that we've achieved the result and we've baked them into the operations of our college. So those are there for your information. And if you have any questions, we'll obviously have individuals from the college who will be prepared to answer those. Also pleased to report that our senior leadership team, which is 5 of our senior leaders, we are undergoing a 360 review. And that means that we are working with an external company to gather information, not so much about results that we achieve, but how we achieve those results. What are the competencies that we're applying, or the skill sets that we're applying that are more relational, and how we are doing our work. So obviously this is not part of performance reviews, but it is part of our ability to both understand ourselves and to look at ways that we can improve individually, but also to look at ways that we can improve collectively as a senior team. And this, as we've gathered more experience with the process, will cascade into our other leaders within the college. We're also soon to be traveling to London, Ontario for our first live RCDSO Connect meeting. We have approximately 150 individuals who will be attending, and this will include mostly members of the profession, but also members of the public. So we've got a great agenda on June 25th in London that will look at providing information from our Complaints and Investigations Department that relates to the patient experience and issues that are important to patients, like communications and informed consent. And we're also going to have a session on access to care, and really trying to understand some of the barriers and opportunities for increasing access to oral health care from the group that gathers on that date. So we're really excited about the opportunity to work in London with that group. Clearly, we have a lot of other issues that we're watching, and I won't go into much detail about these, but still a great amount of work that's happening with other colleges and looking at corporate influences on healthcare professionals. And this is happening specifically at the Ontario College of Pharmacists, and some of the concerns about how corporations are directing the practice of healthcare professionals. This has obviously great interest to us as we are part of a world now where dental corporations are expanding, and we want to make sure that dentists are fully supported and engaged and always exercising their own autonomy and clinical judgment. We're also seeing some incredible and disturbing geopolitical conflicts, and this leads to issues that can manifest in terms of social media and unprofessional social media comments. So what we're trying to do is really provide some information and resources to the profession, both how to conduct themselves on social media accounts. We have an infographic that we are going to be providing to the profession about that, and also providing more information about what we do with this information when it comes to our attention. So if there is the need to launch any particular investigation, we want to provide as much information to the profession as possible that will help them to understand how we objectively and fairly look at this information with the tools that we have as a regulator. And finally, I'll just mention that I am joining you today from the first annual Canadian Oral Health Summit in Halifax. And this is a summit that's been led by the Association of Canadian Faculties of Dentistry. I understand that there's over 300 people that will be attending from today to Saturday, and I look forward to bringing you back some of the learnings from this particular event. It is going to focus on all sorts of issues that relate to oral health care, access to care, and research to advance oral health care in Canada and beyond. So with that, Hanno, I will turn it back to you and obviously be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. We do have a few moments if anyone has a question about either Dan's remarks or his report. Thank you. Seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. But before I introduce that item, I do want to take a moment to share an observation. At our last meeting, I was really pleased to see the broad range of participation. I think since my affiliation with you as a council, it's probably the meeting where I think I had the most names on speakers list. And I think that is something that is very positive and is something that is very good in terms of the mandate that you as a council are serving. So I just want to remind you that I will be keeping a speakers list to ensure that as many people feel that they can participate. I will guarantee that any first-time speaker will be, I will ask them to speak. We will go to second and third time speakers if time permits. So in order to encourage as much participation as possible, I would ask you please to keep your comments or your questions as brief as possible. I would also ask that you try to focus on either the issue that is being discussed or the motion that is being presented. I may interject in the interest of time with a gentle reminder in terms of keeping it brief as possible and focused as possible, but we do want to ensure that as many people have the opportunity to speak. I will also be encouraging sort of representation from both sides. So I want to make sure that as many public members feel comfortable and take the opportunity to speak or ask a question as professional members. So I thank you for your cooperation, and I just wanted to put that out there, and hopefully we will have as broad a range of participants discussing today as we did at our last meeting. The next item on the agenda is the professional liability program. At our, as you recall, at our May meeting, Council heard an update on the divestment process. Since our last meeting, the Procurement Review Group, with the support of its mergers and acquisition advisor, PwC, has launched the planning process for transition. The items for your information and material can be found on pages 105 and 106 of your council package. We also have our PwC principals here with us today to provide a general update. And Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you, please, to introduce our advisors.
Thanks, Hanno. And before I turn it over to our advisors, I just want to give council an update and focus on the briefing materials that you received. This is really a general update, and I wanted to just ensure that council's aware that there's a lot of activity that's going on behind the scenes with our advisors, just to ensure that they understand PLP, the program, the objectives of council that have been laid out clearly in previous briefing materials, the financial situation of the program, and really trying to prepare us for the next steps that Jordan and Andrew will talk about in a moment. There's also been a lot of work that's happening to just ensure that we're on the right path with respect to any legal issues. So working with our advisors and some decisions that have been made based on timelines because of more information that's known today, having worked now for a few months with PwC. So I want to clarify that issue around the timelines, and our procurement review group has talked about this extensively. Initially, we had talked last fall about probably being in a position by January 1st, 2026 to be able to have a transition that occurs, and thinking that this might be the earliest possible date for any transition. After having an opportunity to work more closely with PwC, we've learned that it's very important when you get involved in these sorts of transactions and transitions to move as quickly as possible. So once a preferred entity is identified and when negotiations have been pursued and that there is a transition or transaction agreement, it's really important to move expeditiously. You want to be able to avoid any risks that might go along with too long of a wait, where conditions could change, entities could get cold feet. And certainly Jordan and Andrew can answer any questions about that. But as I said, we've worked with the procurement review group, and that is, as a reminder, Mark Eckler, Mark Trudell, Jamie Colliver, Harinder Sandhu, working closely with Jeff Goldberg and I. And we've really looked at the possibility that this could be transitioned as early as June 2025, although it still could go beyond that. But we just know that given the timelines that we're in right now, that is a possibility. And so we've communicated that internally with the staff. We're communicating that with council today. There are clearly more decisions and lots more work to do. And we will obviously, out of this council meeting, have that kind of communication with the profession. We're also going to ensure that the profession is aware that with their annual fees that come later this year in the fall of 2024, they will be covered throughout the entire year 2025. So we will have lots more information when we have it and we know what direction we're taking. But we want to assure the profession and the public that there will be coverage in place for all of 2025. The other thing I wanted to mention before turning it over is that we are looking at a set of bylaws that would outline minimum insurance requirements. So this is anticipating that as dentists are no longer part of the college's professional liability program, there are expectations that their insurance would be of a minimum nature. And so that's more to come on that. We've said in the briefing materials, we might be able to provide that to council for discussion in September. It might be a little bit beyond that, but again, we will have more information as we proceed. We're making very good progress. There's a lot of preparation work that needs to happen, and the PRG, the Procurement Review Group, is meeting frequently with PricewaterhouseCoopers and our representatives. So I want to turn it over now to Jordan Bamel, who's a partner at PwC, and Andrew Cooper, Managing Director. Before I do, I just want to say that because we are dealing with a competitive process, there is a lot of confidential and sensitive information. So what we want to do today is just provide you with faces to names. You can meet the advisors and they will provide you with more information about the general process. If you ask a question that we're not able to answer, then we will figure out a way to provide you with some information following the meeting or set up an in-camera session at some point down the road. But I want you to be aware that because of the nature of this transaction, that there is always going to be sensitive information that we won't be able to talk about in a public meeting like this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jordan and Andrew.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate that. So good morning, everyone. Maybe a brief introduction from myself and Jordan. So as Dan said, we work as M&A advisors specializing in financial services with a particular focus on insurance. And this is a particularly interesting transaction for a number of reasons, and one which we are hoping we can deliver the best result for the college and for the team. But a little bit about my background, yeah, as Dan said, I'm managing director with Price Waterhouse. Done a number of transactions both in Canada, the US, and Europe across financial services, but a lot in insurance. So we have a good relationships across the insurance industry and with the key participants, and already had a number of approaches from certain participants, which shows there is a very good level of interest for the program, which is very positive in light of delivering on the objectives. So before we sort of talk about the overall transaction process, to give you a bit more color on what the different phases of a divestiture looks like and the associated timelines, maybe I'll pass to Jordan for a quick introduction from himself. Can't hear you,
Jordan,
Jordan.
I think you could be muted.
My sincere apologies. Zoom is always a bit tricky, and I have a new laptop. Thank you, Andrew, and kind of thank you, Council, for having Andrew and I join the meeting this morning. Maybe as a very brief introduction, and then we can move on to kind of a review of the overall process and where we're at. I'm a partner in our Canadian deals practice and also lead our focus on insurance M&A. And as Andrew mentioned, we are very, very deep in the insurance deals space. We participate in somewhere around 20 transactions a year and across the life cycle, and have very close connectivity with a variety of participants across the value chain. You know, we're very, very excited about advising on this specific process, which we're calling Project Delta. We have a lot of experience in the not-for-profit space, and I think we are very confident in our ability to deliver a successful outcome for the college in this instance. And I think we have a sincere appreciation that this isn't just a sale of a business. This is about finding the right partner and steward for the PLP program in the future, and really achieving a holistic set of outcomes and objectives that really will be important to your members and to the college in the future. And so we've spent a lot of time in the early preparatory phase discussing with the PRG, as well as Dan and the rest of the executive team, on what those objectives are and strategies to ensure that they're achieved as part of this process. And so I think we have a really sincere appreciation, not to use that term again, for kind of the nuances of what this transaction means for the college and a strategy to, I think, achieve these intended objectives. So maybe I'll pass back to Andrew to walk through the broad process that we're thinking through. The one thing that I will maybe just reiterate is we have outlined a timeline, but the underlying theme is there's significant flexibility in how we plan to approach this process. We don't have a specific date in mind, and there's a number of factors that can change or accelerate timeline as the process commences. And so we want to provide some guidance and ranges and illustrative dates on when we think things will be done. But the general premise of how we approach this is we need some level of flexibility within a band to ensure that we can maximize the competitive tension and the process overall to achieve those objectives that were outlined as part of this council meeting in the past and our discussions with PRG subsequently. Andrew, maybe back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So I'm hoping what you can see now on screen, if you just scroll, I think it's to slide 3. There we go. I'll talk broadly about this, and this outlines the typical phases of a divestiture program for the assets and associated parts of the business of the PLP that we'll be going through. As Jordan mentioned, we've also put some sort of indicative timeline buckets to that, so you can get a sense of when and where things will be happening. As Jordan mentioned, We've deliberately kept that flexible, and there's a number of reasons that go behind that, and some that Dan mentioned, but just to add on top of that, the flexibility is for a couple of things. One is there is, as I mentioned, there is an element of interest already in the program. So to really capitalize and get the best outcome and achieve as many objectives as we can, it's really important to almost strike while the iron's hot. So that's one thing. The second thing is we're also dealing with a number of different parties in this process. There'll likely be for some other non-for-profits. There'll be some in other insurance companies, and all of those have a mix of experience in terms of M&A. And so having the flexibility to be able to adapt to the different requirements from different types of bidders and different types of ultimate partners is really important. So again, that we can deliver as many of those key objectives that has been outlined by council as possible. Now, we're currently in the deal preparation phase, and as I mentioned to the procurement review group and many inside the college already, this is, I believe, the most important phase. One, it's looking at the strategy and digesting what council has said as the key objectives for divestiture, but it's also around building up the base level of information that investors will be expecting as part of a process, and just the preparation of that to deliver a robust package of information will again help us try and achieve as many of those objectives as possible. So as we sit right now, we're sort of collecting and gathering information, building up our understanding of the PLP program in order to be able to build what's called a confidential information memorandum, which you'll see here as a SIM, which is effectively a marketing document and a story of the program, the key parts of it, and what we are trying to achieve as part of this divestiture, and what we're looking for from investors to respond back to. So we're very much in the middle of that phase. So it's the heavy lift of the deal preparation, which we're in now. And what you'll see at the bottom here is what comes out of that. So a teaser is typically a short document which is circulated to investors to garner their level of interest. So usually typically 2 or 3 pages, which give us the key highlights of the program to provide a level of interest. The confidential information memorandum, or SIM, is a much longer document which provides a much more detailed overview of the business, some of the financial aspects, and some of the key elements of the product and program of the college and the PLP insurance program to date, and the expectations of what any investor will need to sign up to going forward. And thirdly is really just defining what the buyer list is and who will we be approaching. As I said, there's lots of different groups that make up that list, and we're being very targeted about who we approach to try and get the best outcome for the college. As Dan said, that in order to keep the integrity of the process, I won't be able to talk to you about the specific names within that. But as the process evolves, we will provide updates about number of bids and nature of bids as they come in. But unfortunately, to maintain that integrity and confidentiality, we won't be able to divulge on specific names. Phase 1 is typically when you go out to the longer list of parties who are interested in the program, and they will have access to a limited set of information, largely the confidential information memorandum and some other limited information, to help them digest, understand the program. They'll be able to ask questions of us, and we will provide appropriate answers to those. And then the ultimate objective of that is to obtain what's called an expression of interest, which is a non-binding letter which says we are interested in acquiring the PLP program. Here is our economics. Here is what we would like to obtain in addition to the program, i.e. staff, etc. And here is what we need to do to perform our due diligence to confirm that expression of interest. So what we are looking to complete phase 1 towards the back end of this year, so Q3, Q4. And then from there, so you'll get a number of expressions of interest, ideally. Once we have an assessment of those expressions of interest against the objectives about what we're trying to achieve, we will then narrow that down. So from a number of parties to a much smaller group, then to progress and invite them in to complete their diligence in phase 2. And in phase 2, this typically provides a smaller group of investors with a lot more detailed information on the program the different types of contracts. It will also provide them with access to management and a number of via management presentations. So they're able to ask more detailed questions of members of the PLP program and really understand how the program works and how it could potentially fit within their own organization. At the culmination of phase 2, they will submit what's called a letter of intent, which is a more formal submission of confirming their interest in purchasing the program. And this will be, again, reaffirming economics and sort of the perimeter of what they want to acquire and the remaining few final steps about what it will take. Largely, this may be potentially some small top-up diligence, which they weren't able to complete, maybe some approvals that they need to get subsequent to submitting that. But our hope is at the end of phase 2, we will have a very robust letter of intent from a number of parties from which we can select a preferred bidder to progress forward with. That is estimated to start at the end of this year and during Q4 and run into Q1 2025, with the ultimate aim during Q1 2025 to receive that letter of intent. Once we've selected a preferred bidder based on the evaluation of all the letters of intent we've received and understand which one aligns best with our objectives and which one we believe presents the best partner for the college to transfer the program to, we will move into what's called negotiation and completion, which is around looking at the legal documentation. So the legal documentation in terms of this context will be a asset purchase agreement and potentially a transition services agreement. A transition services agreement, for those who are unaware, essentially means what will need to take place between the college and the prospective partner to sort of migrate the program in an orderly and timely manner from the college to the ultimate acquirer so that it's very seamless and the coverage for all members is not impacted at all. As Dan mentioned, all members will be renewing their professional liability insurance at the end of 2024, and that coverage will remain in place throughout 2025, irrespective of when the completion of this transaction happens during 2025. Now, we have it earmarked here for Q1, Q2, 2025. To provide the flexibility, which we talked about earlier, that could roll forward to Q3 and into Q4. But our anticipation is we want to try and keep a relative level of cadence to the transition and to the sales process to try and mitigate any of the risks that Dan mentioned up front. And that transition is the last phase, which will happen throughout the back half of 2025, will be legal day one, which is effectively when the acquirer is the legal owner of the program and legally owns the assets and liabilities which go with it. That will be from which they will step into the shoes of the existing contract that all the liability insurance program, that the renewal that was signed at the back end of 2024. And then that will run until end of 2025 when they will have their own renewal process, and that renewal will happen under their own terms, which we hope will be as closely aligned as we can with the current program. I'm conscious I've talked a lot there, and there's a lot of information to share in such a condensed period of time. Jordan, is there anything else you'd like to add before we do a short period of Q&A?
No, I think happy to open up to any broader questions from the committee.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Jordan. At this time, if anyone has a question, you can please raise your virtual hand. Anthony Mayer.
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you for the excellent presentation. My question is of a very general nature in that I certainly do not want numbers or even percentages, but I'm just curious as to whether you could give us an idea of what you expect the program is worth relative to the reserve that it has to that it currently holds. or is that too specific?
Yeah, I might suggest that's better to take offline via an in-camera session or maybe a standalone conversation. I think value is a complicated concept as it relates to this specific program, and it's not only driven by the economics of the underlying insurance, but also by the parameters of what the go forward structure looks like and how it's mandated, how stable it is, what any additional obligations are put onto that partner. So I think we're happy to have maybe a more in-depth conversation on how we think about value and then maybe the different iterations that it may ultimately result. But it's not a, I know this is not the best answer, but it's not an easy response, and probably is worth a broader discussion as part of an in-camera session outside the guise of kind of a public forum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dan, is your hand up with to add to this or just to have a position on the list?
Yeah, just to add and sort of elaborate that, and I think Jordan's right, that this isn't being able to give council information, but in the right forum. But I wanted to elaborate because when Andrew talked earlier with his example about entities that might have interest, I just want to assure council that all of that specific information goes to the procurement review group. They get very detailed information. So that group is operating on your behalf. And obviously, we want to be able to provide council with information as well, and we will make sure that we have the right setting to be able to do so. But just to let you know that the PRG is looking at very detailed information.
Thanks, Dan. Deborah?
Thank you. Very good presentation. I have a question regarding the marketing of the PLP. What is the strategy to publicize the sale of the PLP? Is it to go to specific insurance companies directly, or is it to publicize it in a journal? What's the strategy?
Yeah, good question, Deborah. So I think there's a couple of aspects to it. One, there's been some inbound, given that there was a public announcement that the PLP would be divested. So there has been some inbound inquiries to participate in the process. So that's number one. Number two, we had a good conversation with the PLP team itself about their thoughts about who would be a good partner for the business, to get their experience and knowledge about who they think might be a suitable partner. And then we also brought in our own experience about professional liability programs and who also might be interested in this type of program. I think there is a careful balance to strike between sort of exhausting the market and having the right number of participants actively participate. We want people who are participating to have a real chance and have a good strategic fit with the objectives of the divestment. And that necessarily doesn't align with lots and lots and lots of different parties. So I think we've taken a really tailored approach to try and access parties who we see the strategic fit for, but not making it so narrow that we're boxing ourselves in. So I think we have a really good number of parties, and I think what we want to try and avoid is people just signing up to the NDA to have a look. So we think that the necessity of that is to really vet and screen the parties who we invite into the process.
So you'll approach certain people that you've already figured out that they would be a good partner in advance. That's what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we've had a discussion with PRG and the PLP team members already about the different types of parties we're thinking about inviting into the process, and it's really about vetting that list to make sure that there is strategic alignment there.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question I have, kind of just a general question, but there was interest when we discussed this a while back. There was a little worry about whether or not we should be looking at only Canadian companies, insurance companies, or insurance companies that have a large footprint in Canada. And I'm just wondering, are we kind of following that general scheme Or, if a British company or an American company showed interest, would we automatically tell them to go away? That's my question.
I might, and I do apologize, Peter. Like I might say that also is a question that is better discussed in a kind of in-camera session. I would say more holistically, we are being very considerate on the parties that are approached on the basis that we want to ensure this is a successful transaction. And a successful transaction is not just getting to the finish line or getting to some sort of consummation, but it's about finding the proper steward for the program in the future. And that involves kind of a multifaceted, uh, valuation criteria that includes their ability to continue to operate in this current market, provide the services and level of care to the dentist community as it's currently been provided, ensure that there's sufficient coverage and protection from a risk perspective. And so all that's taken into consideration. I think naturally lends itself to certain types of buyers that likely have operations currently in Canada. We're trying to be balanced, though, to ensure that we have a competitive process and not to specifically exclude individuals that would otherwise meet all those criteria and would potentially be a great steward for the program in the future. But I think maybe the more nuanced details of how we're thinking about foreign nationals and the level of operations in Canada is better suited for maybe a more in-depth in-camera session.
Thank you. Nancy.
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you, Andrew and Jordan, for that great presentation and the information you provided. I just have a quick question. You mentioned that there are several factors that can influence the timeline. Can you share an example of what some of those factors might be?
Yeah, sure. So I
Thank you.
think as I said, depending on the evolution of the process and how it goes forward will largely dictate the timeline. Part of that is the nature of the parties and some of their specific requirements, but that will largely impact the back end of the transaction rather than the start. And so as they get more detailed, there may be some nuances around approvals that may take an extra couple of weeks, or some additional validation that they require in terms of organizing the right personnel to attend management presentations. That's number one. Number two is around ability to consummate the transaction. And so what we're really trying to mitigate is largely market risk. And so having a long period between until like actual legal day one and signing sign and close provides a number of risks. For example, it could be like COVID happened, for example, as an illustration, that can have a really significant impact on any transactions and people's propensity to want to actually finalize and complete the transaction. So we want to try and keep a level of cadence to try and keep competitive tension, to try and absolutely fulfill as many objectives as possible. And in the same time, we want to be able to be as flexible to some parties who may be less experienced in M&A and don't have a regular cadence and rhythm in being able to participate in these transactions, to try and also put their best foot forward and able to participate on a as level playing field as possible with others. So it is a fine balance of maintaining cadence while also allowing the flexibility for different parties to participate and submit into the parameters of the transaction.
Thank you. I have no more speakers on my list. Dan, did you want to make any closing comments?
I guess just to say that what we will do, obviously, is ensure that council has as much information as possible. There may be an opportunity to establish an in-camera session at the September meeting coming up. There will be a lot more known about the process as we move forward through the summer. And as Jordan and Andrew have said, that it is the intention to go to the entities or to market in around August or September. So that's all I would say. But just to reiterate that the PRG is working quite hard and has met several times with PwC. So Lots of details are being discussed at that level, and we'll continue to make sure that the communication occurs with council as well.
Thanks, Dan. And Andrew and Jordan, thank you both for attending today. Thank you both for your presentation and for sticking around and answering questions. And we look forward to interacting with you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Council, at this point in time, the next item on the agenda, item number 8, is in regard to the college's audited financial statements and the appointment of an auditor. As part of compliance and good governance, the college undertakes an audit each year. The material in your package can be found from pages 107 to 148, and this item is for council's decision. There will be 3 motions, and we will consider them separately. Mark Eckler, Chair of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, will make some introductory remarks, and then Jeff Goldberg, CFO, will walk us through the material. And Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you now, please.
Hanno, thank you very much. I'm pleased to bring you the report of the audited financial statements, which begin on page 107 of our package. But before I begin, I'd like to thank my colleagues on the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, otherwise known as FAR, Rod Stapleforth, Neil Silver, Mark Trudell, Peter Deline, and Harinder Sandhu for their commitment and time. And it goes without saying, Jeff, Kelly, and Sharon are the wheels of that support FAR and keep us going. And to you, I extend a thank you on behalf of all of us. A primary duty of FAR is reviewing the external audit process of the college, including a review of the audited financial statements to ensure that they are reasonable and that we can recommend them to council. 2 sets of audited financial statements are prepared for the college: the RCDSO financial statements in Appendix B and the fund financial statements of the RCDSO pension fund in Appendix C. Motions for the approval of each set of financial statements are included in the BN. Detailed financial commentary has been provided in Appendix A, which provides context for the numbers and notes on the audited statements. Our audit firm, Tinkman LLP, continues to be thorough and well organized, and the committee recommends that we appoint the auditors for the 2024 audit. A motion with this recommendation is also provided. The role of the external auditors is to provide an opinion of the financial statements, to ensure that there are no significant deficiencies, and review the appropriate internal controls are in place and operating effectively. The audit partner and audit manager from Tinkman attended the May FAR committee meeting and presented their report on the 2023 audit. In the report, they explained their independent standards, the steps they undertook in the audit process, and the audit risks they focused on. The committee has also had an opportunity to meet with the audit partner and manager from Tinkman at an in-camera session without the staff, and we have no concerns that were identified. At this time, I'll ask Jeff to make some brief comments of the highlights of the statements, and we'll be pleased to take any questions. After that, Jeff will present about the operating reserve, which you can be referenced on page 149. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. So as mentioned, one decision that needs to be made today is the appointment of the auditor for 2024. Now, staff continue to be happy with Tinkham. The quality of work is good and the relationship is excellent. Their fee continues to be below market and they have good experience in the regulatory sector. So management recommends the reappointment of Tinkham for the 2024 audit, as does FAR. So in addition to the auditor appointment decision, there's 2 sets of financial statements before you, as Mark mentioned. Financial statements for the college and financial statements that relate to the pension plan. So detailed notes are included that start on page 109. So I'm not going to go into detail, just mention a few highlights about the statements. So we ended the year with a surplus of 4.8 million, which exceeded the budget by 3.2 million. So very good results. And shortly, we'll talk about the use of the surplus. The main driver of that increase was due to investment income. It was up 3.9 million from the prior year and exceeded budget by 2 million. So we enjoyed really, really good results in this area. The only significant change year over year in the statements is that the pension plan asset has been removed from the statements for 2023. And that's really due to the annuity buy-in we executed earlier in the year, one which will reduce complexity and risk for the college. And just on a last note, the pension financial statements you'll find in the package are solely used to satisfy regulatory obligations. And hopefully in 2025, those will no longer be required as we complete the pension transaction. So I'm going to turn it back to Hannah for questions and motions.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So, and thank you, Mark. Any questions for either Jeff or Mark at this point in time? Seeing none, could I have motion 2A? Oh, excuse me, Anthony Lisho.
Well, it's not a question. I was going to propose the motion.
Okay, thank you. So if we could have a motion 2A on the screen, please, that council approve the December 31st, 2023 RCDSO audited financial statements as presented, and that the president be asked to sign an official copy on behalf of council. That was moved by Anthony Lisho, seconded by Deborah Wilson. All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand. And that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. If we could now move to the second motion, please, or the next motion rather, which is motion 2B, that council approves the December 31st, 2023 audited fund financial statements of the RCDSO pension fund as presented, and that the president is asked to sign an official copy on behalf of council. And that's moved by Robin Summerhill, seconded by Nalin. All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand. And that motion is also carried unanimously. Thank you. And if I could now have motion 2C on the screen, please. That council approves the appointment of Tinkham LLP to conduct the RCDSO audit and the RCDSO pension fund audit for the year 2024. That's moved by Nizar, seconded by Anthony Lisho. All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand again. And that motion is also carried unanimously. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jeff, to provide an opportunity to have a discussion about the reserves, please.
Thank you, Hannah. So I'm going to provide some brief comments on the proposal for reserves. There's more information in the BN. So we've been talking about the priority of getting the operating reserve fully funded for a couple of years now. And we've talked about the implications of not having this accomplished, including not being compliant with the CPMF. So last year, as part of the budget presentation, you might remember we presented a 3-year plan to fund the reserve using projected surpluses. Now, you just heard we had a surplus in 2023. So is the first stage of our 3-year plan, FAR is recommending we use this surplus to transfer $2 million to the operating reserve. So this would represent meaningful progress, as after this transfer, the college will have a reserve of $3.5 million, which is 50% of the $7 million target, and a very good step. Those are really my comments. The rest is in the BN, but that's the the gist of it. So I'm going to turn it back to Hanno for questions, and we do have a requested motion for this item as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Amelia, I see your hand up, but is it up for question? Okay. Thank you. Anthony Mayer.
Thank you, Jeff. Quick question. Just wondering whether any consideration was given to moving the whole surplus over to the reserve, and why not?
Right. So the 4.8, you're right, is a good surplus, and that was the idea to move that over. However, by writing the pension plan off this year, that went against unrestricted resources as well. So really, if you take that off, the increase was 2.8 million. Now, because all those go through unrestricted resources, which is our equity for the college, if we took more, then the balance in unrestricted resources was just over 3 million. So if we took 4.8 million, we would be in a negative equity position. And that is, that has several implications for us. That would be a reputational issue. It would be a sign of financial distress, that we do not have financial distress at this point. But it would signal to others that we are struggling to cover our financial obligations, which is not the case. And I think those reasons, I think, are enough why we wouldn't do it. We also, you know, as we go into a PLP divestment process, we want to make sure that the potential purchasers see us as a strong company, which we are financially. Does that answer the questions?
No, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Jeff. I see no other people on my speakers list, so if I could have motion 2D on the screen, please. That council approves the transfer of $2 million from unrestricted resources to the operating reserve. That's moved by Mark Trudell, seconded by Anthony Mayer. All those in favor, again, please raise your virtual hand. And that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Jeff. We are going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which continues the work now led by the Governance Committee. Good governance, as Harinder noted, is at the heart of effective regulation, accountability, and public trust. It is the foundation of our work. The material in your package can be found from pages 151 to 163. This item is for Council's decision. Anne Coughlin, our Governance Committee Chair, will be walking Council through this material. And Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point in time, please.
Thank you, Hanno, and good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to present a proposal from the Governance Committee this morning. Today, Council is asked to consider, next slide, please. Council is asked to consider and to provide the Governance Committee with direction to continue development with 3 integrated modernization concepts: adopting a province-wide election, reducing the number of elected council dentists from 12 to 10, and implementing staggered terms for council members. This item is for Council's decision. Materials are at pages 151 to 163 of your meeting package. I will briefly summarize the proposal for you today and then turn over to Hanno to present the recommendation and motion and to facilitate discussion. In the interest of time, and because we need to think about these modernization concepts as an integrated concept, in an integrated context, I'd ask that we hold questions until the end of the presentation, please. Next slide, please. As you have heard frequently in previous presentations, there have been a number of drivers for governance modernization. Some of the key influencers are listed on this slide. Council established the Governance Committee with a specific mandate to explore governance modernization to the extent possible within the parameters of the current legislative framework. In March, Council was presented a high-level preliminary report of 4 modernization concepts for discussion. Council was not asked to make decisions on any of the issues at that time, and the Governance Committee took the discussion of Council back for its further deliberations. In April, the Governance Committee further discussed these concepts and achieved consensus about moving forward with the 3 concepts outlined in the proposal before you today. Next slide, please. The first modernization concept for your consideration is adopting a province-wide election, a single electoral district. This slide highlights the key rationale for adopting a province-wide election. It advances the public interest. Public interest is about public confidence, and public confidence in the regulator is critical to public safety. As Council has heard before, elections by geographic districts contributes to confusion about Council and the College's mandate. District elections exacerbate the perception that eligible and successful candidates represent the interests of the profession, which is contrary to the fiduciary duty of every Council member to the College's public interest mandate. An Ontario-wide election would help reinforce that dentists elected to Council serve the public interest. Adopting a province-wide election would also enhance diversity on Council beyond geographic diversity. An Ontario-wide election would enable the recruitment and approval of a slate of candidates who bring a mix of skills, lived experience, and attributes that reflect the rich diversity of the Ontario public and communities the College serves. A province-wide election would also strengthen competency-based selection, enabling multiple high-caliber candidates from the same region with other means to ensure that regional perspectives are always considered. Other health regulatory colleges in Ontario have recently adopted this model, and we will utilize their research and experience to inform policy decisions at RCDSO. Next slide, please. The Governance Committee will work with Council to review and refresh the current Council competencies to ensure they represent diversity attributes and lived experiences. Before the 2026 election, the current Council will evaluate Council members' collective skills, expertise, and diversity attributes to identify strengths and opportunities for enrichment. The Governance Committee will use the data to develop a candidate profile for the 2026 election to enhance Council's capacity. Staff will conduct research and analysis for the Governance Committee's consideration regarding further operational components. Next slide, please. I'll now move on to talk about the second modernization concept, reducing the size of Council. The rationale for this concept is highlighted on the slide. Smaller boards demonstrate better communication, make decisions more effectively, and are more likely to develop a culture of inclusiveness. Maintaining 11 public members while reducing the number of elected further advances parity of professional to public members. It is a modest reduction in Council size and demonstrates RCDSO's leadership in using existing legislative provisions to achieve governance goals such as shared leadership. Next slide, please. There are some key considerations with respect to this component. Reducing the number of elected dentists is dependent on Council's direction to proceed with electoral reform. This change will maintain a strong professional voice at Council, dentists will be able to meaningfully contribute to discussions and decisions regarding governing the dentistry profession. With the prospect of an increasingly smaller council, it will be important to find other ways to enable engagement with the public and the profession to preserve participation. Next slide, please. The third and final modernization component is implementing staggered terms on council. Currently, all 12 of RCDSO's districts are re-elected biennially. This means there is always a risk of complete or substantial turnover on council, resulting in loss of institutional memory and continuity. Committees are reappointed on the same cycle, which exacerbates challenges with continuity and succession planning. Implementing staggered terms would support retention of institutional knowledge, continuity of strategic projects and regulatory functions, effective transitions and succession planning, and a balance of experience and new perspectives on council. Next slide, please. Implementing staggered terms would mean electing a smaller number of council members every year, a common practice among health regulatory colleges. There are various approaches to transition to staggered terms. Staff will present the governance committee with options and analysis upon council's direction to proceed with this modernization component. The governance committee would develop and implement bylaws in consultation with council well in advance of the 2026 election cycle. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, if council directs the governance committee to explore continued development of the integrated modernization concepts today, consultation will take place over the summer, and the governance committee will present consultation feedback, further proposal developments, and accompanying bylaws to council for consideration and approval when appropriate. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation, and I'll now turn it back to Hanno to facilitate discussion.
Thank you very much, Anne, for your presentation. Anthony Lisho, you're first on my list.
Thank you, Hanno. I'd like to compliment the governance committee. I think you've done great work, and I'm encouraged that you will continue in that respect. Having been appointed to council for various reasons, which I will not go on, and having gone through the competency process, which was rather probably one of the first that was done. I think it's a great way to move forward, and I think that it will benefit the college. It will benefit the public, of course. So I'm all in favor of continuing in that fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that great presentation. I listened to all the points and read the work the night before, and I'm just not a fan of the first two of lessening the dentists or changing the district areas in terms of public interest. I think that this is just a dangerous time to make that change with the change in the landscape of dentistry with CDCP and access to care. And I'm from a rural area, so having someone look to make sure that the public in this area is represented in public interest is very different than landscape than in city areas, and the access to care might change drastically coming in the future. So I think having the district areas being covered to represent the public and different things changing in the landscape over the time in the next few years is going to be very important. So I'm just not sure that this is the right time to make those first two changes. The third I'm fine with. Thanks.
Thank you. Mark Eckler. Mark, have you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks for the reminder that I was silenced. Self-imposed. I'm not sure who to direct the questions to. but anyone can take a stab at them. In the new proposed province-wide model, how does it guarantee that high caliber candidates from the same region will actually come forward? That's one. Two, what specific means are going to be in place to ensure that regional perspectives that Robin alluded to are guaranteed?
Mark, I'm happy to start with that, and if anyone else wants to respond. This discussion is helpful in informing the governance committee's next discussion. So what I'm hearing is that those 2 points are important for us to be considering as we're looking at the processes that will be put in place to implement these 3 concepts. Today's presentation and discussion is to get council's support for moving forward with that continued governance committee discussion. And Dan, I don't know if something you'd like to add.
A follow-up then, the business note also says that the geographic election model does not guarantee a diverse group of candidates in each district. What do you mean by diversity, and how does it not guarantee a diverse group will come forward?
So what is meant by diversity will be guided by the college's EDI work. And again, we are going to be looking at how to integrate that into the concept's further development. I can give you an example, and I'm sure all of you, it is in my experience looking at boards, it is possible, and we've seen historically, it's not the case now, but it's possible that you could look at the very same demographic being elected in every geographic district. So that is the worst case scenario in terms of diversity. What we want to look at is how do we enhance the best possible chance of a diverse group of council members.
Thank you, Anne. Next on my list, Peter Deline.
Thank you. So the comment I have for Anne is I like the idea about the staggered terms, both on council, the council and the committees, kind of staggering those a little bit, possibly within council as well, some staggering. I always thought that a 2-year term was a little bit short. I thought, especially with your first term on council, it probably takes you 2 years. When you meet, let's say 8 times a year or 4 times a year, so maybe 8 times in 2 years, it probably takes you those 2 years before you kind of learn your role. You learn how to sort of navigate council. And I was hoping the committee could maybe look at 3-year terms versus 2-year. Thank you.
We will take that back. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie.
Yes, thanks, Anne, for that presentation. My question, and again, this will be for an open answer. Does a reduction in the size of council impair any of the works done by the good committees, both from a statutory point of view? In other words, are we able to adequately populate those committees to do that important work? And what numbers of bylaws need to be changed to facilitate the regulatory and or statutory requirements for having committees? Thank you.
So I'll start, and then I'll ask Dan or any other staff member to assist. In terms of populating statutory committees, one of the things that council has embraced is the addition of subject matter experts. So I think that is going a long way to ensuring down the road, as council becomes smaller, that won't be a challenge. In terms of the number of bylaws, I'm not confident in responding to what numbers, and I'm not sure if the work's been done to look at specifically what bylaws would be affected. But Dan, perhaps you have that information.
Yeah, well, I think we're early days, and there was a list of some of the bylaws that would be potentially impacted in the briefing materials. Obviously, it depends on council's direction. It depends on the specifics that are worked out by the governance committee. But there's a finite number of bylaws that relate to elections and council and committees. So that would have to undergo an extensive review. In response to the question that relates to populating committees, I think in addition to the subject matter experts that this council's discussed previously and also later today, I think the biggest rate limiting step for committees is the number of public members. And so we are not contemplating going to a reduction from the 11 public members, which is the maximum based on legislation, and ensuring that we have the public member complement to be able to populate all the committees where public members are required and essential, which is all committees, but some have legislative requirements. We have had some expansion in the use of non-council dentists on many, if not all of our committees, and we will continue to do that. So I'm not as worried about the committee population because of those factors that relate to the subject matter experts, the number of public members, and the use of non-council dentists.
Thanks, Dan. Deborah.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and the information provided to us all. I am supporting what Robin said. I have a very real concern that a reduction, first of all, just having a province-wide election for council is going to reduce the public's ability to bring certain concerns forward. There's a real risk of the council members being elected in a concentrated area in Ontario, because the current model prevents this. So there is making sure that each region has some form of communicating concerns through council. The current model that is being proposed does not ensure that. The second concern I have is, again, risk to the public interest in reducing the council members, again, not having a voice through the dentist to convey their concerns. Quite often, dentists will be just not only just treating a patient, but also aware of limited access to dental care and can bring this kind of information forward to the RCDS so that we can address concerns. Reducing the number of dentists on council is going to, again, be at risk to the public to convey information to the RCDS regarding public concerns. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I do support the rotation of terms, though. I think that would be a progressive move. The other two, I don't think is progressive at all. Thank you.
Deborah, and I see Dan, your hand is up. Is that to respond or to be on the list?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a couple of comments, and maybe this will, weigh into the members who are in the queue as well. I think, Deborah, it's really important to remember that the approach that's been taken by the governance committee is designed to be an integrated approach, that there's no system that will solve all the problems or challenges, that there are no guarantees, and maybe that was an inappropriate use of the word guarantee in the briefing materials. But what we have are a number of issues that can be addressed, and the proposal is that they may be better addressed by an integrated solution. So Anne talked about competency and diversity, and also talked about fiduciary duty. And I think it's really important to note that members of the public do not vote for dentists. Dentists come to the table and are there to provide a perspective, but not to provide a voice back to the region. This is not a structure where the election creates a model where the dentists on council go back and discuss issues with the region. Your fiduciary duty is to this organization, and that's what you bring. Members of the public will still have all the opportunity in the world to come to us directly. We have practice advisory service, we have complaints process, we have people that can answer questions. And so members of the public do not generally go through the dentists within the districts either. So that is the nature of this organization, that we communicate with all parties, and we communicate in a structured, standardized, consistent way with dentists, with the public, with our stakeholders. I just want that to be really clear to this this council, and it might also factor into some of the other comments that are in the queue right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lara, did you want to be on the list, or do you also have a response to make?
My apologies. I just wanted to note, there were some concerns that taking away the 12 geographic districts would result in a loss of sort of that geographic or regional diversity on council. And the intent with shifting to the province-wide approach is not to lose those perspectives, whether it's the rural perspective or the perspective of remote communities. We kept the briefing note high level because I think there are a number of operational components that will need to be worked out. But one of the first pieces will be looking at our current council competency profile and revising that to include those really important diversity attributes. So, they could be things like particular communities or regions, or diversity attributes that council feels are important and that need to be reflected in around the table. So that's a critical piece of work that will need to happen. And then, council would assess their collective skills and attributes before the 2026 election. And the committee would then, the idea would be the committee would build a candidate profile that would enable council to enhance its capacity by going out and recruiting for those particular attributes. So if council determined that, having a French-speaking person on council, or having the perspective of a rural community was important, or other remote communities, you can build that into the profile. And it just allows for more rigorous recruitment and flexibility for the governance committee to, in the weighting of candidates in the selection process.
Thank you, Lara. Next, Judy, please.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to, first of all, thank Anne for her leadership and Lara on this committee. I'm involved, and I do have a question that that really relates back to something that Robin said, and I don't know who I should really address this question to, but Robin mentioned that she thought that this was a dangerous time to be making changes of this nature, and she sort of looped that into the CDCP and I'm not a dentist, so I'm not really as intensely involved in that aspect of it, and I'm just wondering if somebody could explain how the two things are related. It's being a dangerous time, CDCP, and then these proposed changes, because I'm not quite understanding that.
Dan, can I throw that to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Robin may want to briefly address that. I'm not sure what it meant. I mean, I think as a college, as a public interest organization, it's actually a great opportunity to increase access to care for patients and the public. And so obviously there are issues that we need to be cognizant of with respect to the profession. But I'm not sure I share that view that Robin may have expressed, or maybe I don't fully understand it. But I'll turn it back to you, Hanno.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to very quickly go to you, Robin, even though there's still two first-time speakers. So if you very quickly could just answer Judy's question, and then I would like to go back to the first-time speakers, please.
Sure. I just think at this time and I was referring to the changes that are coming forward with the CDCP and how it's going to affect the landscape of dentistry in the next few years. And I think that you can see this clearly in the shape of medicine and the medical profession right now, and that rural care for medical doctors they're the first to be very lacking physicians in rural areas. They just can't keep their practices running financially up here. And it is quite different as well for a dentist. Everything costs more up here. My shipping costs more. To get a repair guy in when something's breaking costs me an arm and a leg. So as the CDCP takes effect and financial stresses hit dental offices, the rural practices are going to close first, and corporate offices are going to take over because the large corporations can buy in bulk, and all sorts of financial issues on running a business. And I think we're just going to lose the representation in the rural areas that might be suffering from access to care from the CDCP first as offices close, as if this heads towards universal dental care, which many politicians make it sound that's the way they're headed.
Thank you. Next on my first speakers list, Aaron. Aaron, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I'm going to redirect this and actually take my comments back to the second point of reducing the size of council. I just had a few thoughts on that. It seems like if it's a marginal reduction in the number, I wonder if the utility of doing that would also be marginal. It would make sense if we had a 30-person council that we're slashing down to 12, but reducing the number by 1 or 2 doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. I share Jamie's concerns with regard to populating the committees. And I think that the professional members of the committees who are on council provide a really valuable link between council and the committees. We get that continuity there that we wouldn't necessarily get from non-council committee members. And being that with 10 or 11 public members, if that's a rate limiting step, I don't think we would want to create that same issue, struggling to put professional members on committees if we only have 10 or 11 of those. My other thought on that is the whole goal of this is to improve the diversity and the competency in council. And it feels like decreasing the pool might be contrary to that. So my question would be, would there be an option to leave the number open instead of saying we need 10 professional members or 12 professional members? If we left that number a little bit up in the air, if we left it as a range, then if we had a pool where we have a lot of really excellent candidates, especially if we do go to the single electoral pool, then there can be a place for these people to bring their skills to council. Or if we're in this situation like we were in this year, where we have some seats that it's been really difficult to fill, then that's okay. We don't have to expend a lot of time and resources going out and really aggressively trying to fill a seat just for the sake of filling the seat. So those are my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Next on my list is Ram. Ram?
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the good report. I have one question. We have been trying to get an Aboriginal person on the council for quite some time, and we haven't got that fulfilled. And I see that there was a lot of talk about diversity. I feel very strongly that do we have some kind of strategy this time to attract somebody from Aboriginal community to come on our council.
Thank you, Ram, for that comment. And while we don't currently have a strategy, it is something the governance committee is committed to looking at. This, as I said earlier, once we get the go-ahead from council, we have lots of ideas that we want to get more information, research, and develop around, so that we can put in place processes to address that kind of an issue. And certainly there are examples from other regulators and other industries that we can draw on that helps to encourage candidates who may not typically run for election to consider putting their name forward to sit on the council. So we're absolutely committed to bringing back to council strategies in that regard.
Thank you. Lara, did you want to comment on that as well?
Thank you, Hanno. Yes, I just wanted to add to Anne's comments to mention that we do have a guest speaker today who's going to be speaking to council about her experience in regulation. She is an Indigenous, and I think she'll be able to answer this question as to how we can better engage with Indigenous communities to improve representation and perspective on council and committees.
Okay, thank you. Anthony Mayer, you're next.
Oh, thank you, Hanno. I just wanted to point something out. As a member of this committee, I just wanted to remind the other councilors that we're looking at 10 elected dentists, but there's still going to be 2 appointed dentists from the university. So that means that it's 12 versus 11 public members. So in this proposal, the composition is still slightly got more dentists than public members. And I just also want to remind everybody that we've had a lot of presentations on this subject, and it's actually abundantly clear that councils with boards with smaller numbers of people actually are more productive and effective than the large number that we have. And we all actually, most of us voted to reduce the number because we thought it was a good idea. It's just that we are actually currently limited by the legislation. We can only go from 12 to 10. And it's somewhat a, I guess, symbolic move in the moment. And, you know, possibly with new legislation in the future, we might be able to address the issues more comprehensively. So it's not a question, it's just a statement. And thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Alan Bromstein.
Well, I thought maybe I could help with regard to 2 issues that have been raised. The first is, could we have a bylaw if we did not have regional elections, but rather had an overall election? Could we have a bylaw that allowed for flexibility in the number of elected dentists? And the answer is yes, but no less than 10 and no more than 12, because that's under the Dentistry Act. So there could be some flexibility if you went to a non-geographic model to have more if council felt they were required, and that would have to be in the bylaw. The other thing that's been raised a couple of times is the concerns with regard to populating the committees of the college, and I don't think you should have any concern with regard to that, quite frankly. We have not only subject matter experts, which have been recognized, but we have non-council committee members. And the bylaws are very flexible with regard to the numbers of people on each of the committees, both the statutory and non-statutory committees. And quite frankly, they're also very easy to change. So there's only a couple of legislatively required committees where you have to have certain numbers of people on it. And frankly, I don't see that would ever be a problem, no matter what you decide.
Thanks, Alan. Brian Smith.
Thank you, Hanno. First of all, my thanks to Anne and all the members of the governance committee for the work they've done. And it's a challenging task, but I'm here to commend you for the recommendations you brought forward. I don't think there's anything there that will be too too earth-shattering to currently the way we do business now and the importance of working towards more diversity and assessing competencies as we go forward. So I would be supportive of that as a public member who has had an opportunity to work on the governance side of things as well. And I think we, to achieve what we've done here today, there's been a lot of good thought for Anne and the folks to consider going forward. And I thank them and look forward to their challenge. Nothing that we're going to do here is going to inhibit our abilities to improve diversity and competencies and achieve the best we can in the public interest. So thanks again, and we look forward to further discussions.
Thank you, Brian. I'm aware of the time. I would like to bring the motion forward, but that's the end of my first-time speakers list. Anthony Liscio and Mark Eckler, you're on my second speakers list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to make your point, and then I'm going to call the motion, please. So Anthony Liscio, you're first.
Thank you very much, Hanno. First of all, I'd like to thank Anne for her most recent comments, because I think it re-clarifies and re-emphasizes where the governance committee is presently. The points that Robin and Jamie and a number of other members have brought up, I think will be greatly enhanced by the new process that's being proposed. What we have presently doesn't work. There were a number of electoral districts that were acclaimed, and even one that I know for sure that even after requests were made post-election still wasn't filled. And that's one of the reasons I'm here. And again, having gone through the process of the competency, it enhanced me to be here because I had something to contribute. It was onerous at the beginning, and I think it also addresses Jamie's points about getting familiar. By doing this process, you will already be familiar. So you don't need to be on council for 2 years to say, okay, now I've got the hang of it. You will already have the hang of it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Eckler.
Hanno, thank you very much. Just to start off, I know I'm very cognizant of time. I don't think 30 seconds will do my second comments justice. So we have a choice. It's up to the council to indulge me for a few minutes or 30 seconds. So I will start. First of all, I am in my 4th term. I have no self-interest, as I am not allowed to run for a province-wide or district election, and I agree with that. All right. I also represent a GTA riding, and I live in a GTA riding. So my comments are also not self-serving. I echo previous comments. I am afraid that this will result in less rural dentists from smaller communities being elected, and that people from urban centers such as GTA being stacked with council. I do not see any, I have a hard time supporting a 1 district election without seeing any concrete protections in place to make sure certain voices are not silenced and distant perspectives are heard. 1. 2 is that we've alluded to diversity attributes. I'm not exactly sure what you were referring to, but I am proud to be on council, and I'm proud that we have Harinder Sandhu as our president. It is a first, and it is a step forward. I am proud that we had a female president at the last council and a non-Caucasian vice president at the last council. If those are the attributes you're referring to, then that seems to have worked itself out. Presently, 5 out of 12 councillors are female, all right? And we have visible and non-visible minorities as well on council. In respect to my fiduciary responsibility that I represent the public, which I do, not my so-called constituents. I think you have a public relations problem and an education problem. And that won't be solved by removing districts or regional representation. I think we have to educate, like we do our counselors, and on a constant basis, educate the dentists, not on one-offs, but educate that we are here to protect the public, not represent him. Should I get elected under a one-district model, I suspect the people in Halton Peel will still contact me thinking that I'm, unquote, quote, their representative, which I am not. In respect to the vacancy that we had in District 9, I had inquired about running in District 9. I live in District 9, but I was told because I am not retired, I cannot run in District 9, and I have to run in the District 4. Had I been allowed to run in Area 4, all right, Area 9, that would have opened up another spot for someone with probably more competence than myself and leading to diversity in that respect. So I think there's other ways to mitigate the diversity without silencing or quieting the voices that others on the council alluded to.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And closing comments to you, Harinder.
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you, the committee, the governance committee, for their hard work. And I also want to thank all the members who have expressed very passionate views on how they see it. But I think the key is that all of these comments are going to be taken back by the committee, as many times has been alluded before. And let's see what they come up with. So let's not close our minds to it. All views are worthy of consideration, and I am very sure that Anne and her group will take these into consideration, and let's see what comes out of it. So let's not close the book on this, and let them do the work, having this feedback, and go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Harinder. And if I could ask to have motion 3 on the screen, please. And council, I would ask you also to carefully consider the language of the motion. And the motion reads that council directs the governance committee to continue development with the following 3 modernization concepts: adopting a province-wide election, i.e. one district, reducing the size of council from 12 to 10 elected dentists, and implementing staggered terms for council members. And that is moved by Ram, seconded by Anthony Lisho. All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, that's 14 in favor. Please lower your virtual hands. Those opposed to the motion, please raise your virtual hand now. Six opposed. Please lower your hands. Any abstentions? Okay, seeing none, that motion required a simple majority, and that motion then passed based on a simple majority. So thank you, Anne, and your group for all your hard work. Thank you, Anne, for your presentation. Thank you, council, for your considered comments and questions. And at this point in time, we are going to take a 15-minute break before we continue on with the rest of the agenda. So I would ask you all to be back at 11:10, and please turn your cameras off during the break, and we will see you all here at 11:10. Thank you very much. Welcome back, council. We will now continue in the governance vein. Before we begin this item, I just wanted to note that from 11 a.m. till noon, Mark Trudell will not be in attendance due to a work-related scheduling conflict. The next item concerns subject matter experts to the Discipline Committee. This follows a decision Council made in September 2023 to create a new category of committee members, subject matter experts. The materials for this item are at pages 164 to 166 of your meeting package, and this item is for Council's decision. Gillian Slaughter, who leads the Professional Conduct and Regulatory Affairs team, will also be walking Council through this material. Gillian?
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Council. I'm pleased to be able to speak to you today about the briefing note, as Hannah has alleged, is on 164 of the materials. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to acknowledge the help of Susan Dick, Hearings Office Administrator, and Sinead Earley, Manager of Investigations with this work. Let me give you some background, please. RCDSO is experiencing a high volume of referrals to discipline. In the past 9 months, 25 investigations have been referred to discipline for 18 unique registrants. More referrals are anticipated. The college has not, to my knowledge, previously experienced this volume of referrals before, with the previous high water mark in 2018 when 16 referrals were completed. The large volume places demands on existing resources, and there are concerns that it will be more challenging to manage, both in terms of convening panels with experienced panel chairs and writing the panel decisions. Other health regulators are also looking at options for handling their volumes or bringing expertise onto their discipline committees. One example is the Ontario Physicians and Surgeons Discipline Tribunal. As you'll see in the briefing note, there's some brief information there that since 2022, that tribunal has been collaborating with 3 other health regulators on a shared approach to using adjudicators to preside over discipline proceedings. That tribunal is inviting other health regulators to join the program in 2025, but that option is not being recommended to you at this time. I'm raising it to simply show that there are all kinds of alternatives that are being considered by health regulators, and I'd like to speak to you about the one that is being proposed to you today. Staff are asking Council direction about the appointment of subject matter experts to the Discipline Committee. Executive Committee gave direction in May to bring this matter forward to you. Specifically, Council's being asked for direction to bring proposed bylaw changes at the upcoming meeting in September of 2024 to appoint subject matter experts to the Discipline Committee. I'm going to pause here for a second. I'd like to say that the Discipline Committee has been working diligently and ably to deal with complex hearings, and staff and I have been taking great pleasure in supporting them. This request is being made to further support the committee in the face of a larger than anticipated volume of referrals. So I'm going to outline the request. Like the appointments that Council has approved for the Governance Committee and for the Inquiries, Complaints and Reports Committee, staff are asking Council to consider appointing subject matter experts to the Discipline Committee. Such subject matter experts would be adjudicators, persons who are experts in administrative law and in the work of tribunals. And if this change were to be effected, at the request of the Discipline Committee Chair, these subject matter adjudicators, I'm going to call them SME adjudicators, would be able to chair discipline panels, to hear motions and conduct discipline hearings, write or assist in writing discipline panel decisions, and provide training and orientation to Discipline Committee members. One point to note is that the Discipline Committee Chair would always have discretion to appoint herself or other Discipline Committee members to chair panels. And in such cases, the chair would be able to also appoint a SME adjudicator as a panel member to provide support. There's some effects of this change that I'd like to draw to your attention. As you know, independent legal counsel, which I'm going to call ILC, they do currently attend all discipline hearings to provide legal advice to the panels. ILC also provide legal advice for pre-hearing matters and about decision writing. With this model, ILC would not be required for discipline proceedings, as a SME adjudicator would essentially replace ILC. To effect this, amendments will be required to the Discipline Committee Rules of Procedure and other operational changes the Discipline Committee and/or staff could make. Bylaw amendments, though, would be required to appoint the SME adjudicators to the Discipline Committee, as well as to make then changes to committee composition, like you've seen for the ICRC and Governance Committee, as well as for per diems. In terms of financial pieces, we do not believe that the financial implications of this change will be significant. Staff have completed cost estimates and do not anticipate that the cost of appointing SMEs to the Discipline Committee would be much different than the cost of ILC providing advice to the panels. So I'll inform you why we're proposing this today. Staff think that appointing these subject matter expert adjudicators who are well-versed in the work of the Discipline Committee would assist in effectively chairing discipline proceedings and advancing the work of the committee. In terms of competencies, we have in mind adjudicators who have skills in chairing and writing decisions and are familiar with this college and/or other health regulators. But we will leave that competency work to the work of staff and the Governance Committee. These adjudicators would be appointed in addition to the professional and public members of the Discipline Committee. And this will build upon the knowledge and the skills of the Discipline Committee members that they already bring to the proceedings. This proposal is also in keeping with the guiding principles for governance that Council adopted in 2021, namely that bringing expertise onto committees to support effective decision-making is in the public interest. And lastly, the reason for making this proposal is that these changes could be made relatively quickly. If Council supports this direction, staff will then bring forward to you proposed bylaw changes at the September 20th, 24 Council meeting. Hanno, those are my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions that Council may have. Sinead Earley is also available too, and I believe Dan Faulkner is available too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jillian. So at this point in time, before we put the motion before Council, Jamie Colliver, you're first on my list.
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you, Jill. Always nice to hear from you. With regard to adjudicators, my specific question is, and you made reference to it, I think, they're not on a per diem per se, are they? Or are they on a per diem that is more relevant to a traditional lawyer's hourly fee? How would that work, number one? And second of all, with the material that gets distributed to the Discipline Committee in advance, is everybody on the same level playing field in terms of that information dissemination, or would the adjudicators have some priority in terms of how they receive information? Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Jenny. Nice to see you as well. In terms of the per diems, presently ILC are paid an hourly rate for their work in supporting the Discipline Committee. And that's why I raised the need for a per diem change. I envision that the per diems that would be paid to these subject matter experts would probably not be the ones that are currently being put forward to or for professional members. I think this is something that needs to be taken away for discussion and negotiation to see what would be a reasonable per diem rate or rate that could be provided for these SME adjudicators. When we did the financial costing, we were looking at if we were to maintain the same hourly rate paid to ILC, that would then need to be made payable to the SME adjudicators, that essentially it looked like it would be a one-to-one switch. It would not really have a material impact. If we were able to negotiate a lesser rate, then that would be more favorable for us. Not sure where we would arrive at that kind of discussion. As for the material distributed to committee, Jamie, that material would be sent to the panel at the exact same time. Those adjudicator members would be panel members or chairs if the chair of the discipline committee appointed them that way. And so they would be getting the materials at the exact same time as the rest of the panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter Deline.
Good morning, afternoon, whatever it is now. Julian, just wondering, is a SME, does that person have a vote with the panel, or are we looking at sort of a judge and jury kind of a situation? And you know, the way the independent legal counsel kind of gave advice but didn't actually vote on anything. I'm wondering if the same applies here.
Thanks, Peter, for the opportunity to speak to this. So as members of the discipline panel, if an adjudicator is put on it, they have an equal voice or vote on that panel. They are but one voice with the other panel's members, so that they would have an equal voice with the other people who are appointed for that discipline hearing. So in the sense that that would be a difference than what we have currently with ILC, where ILC's role is solely to give legal advice to the panel. This would be making these persons who get appointed to the discipline committee as adjudicators a voice around the table that has the opportunity to weigh in on their thoughts about the hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. And thank you, Jill, for the presentation. As chair of the committee, I've had an opportunity to speak with Jill about this, probably a little bit more than other members of the discipline committee. And I just wanted to say that I do support it. And I also see a benefit in the change in that the subject matter experts so ILC can provide advice to the panel, but doesn't really play a role in the decision making, and in fact is very careful not to play a role in the decision making. And in the last few years, we had a couple of very challenging cases where, you know, as the chair, I would have liked to be able to get more than the sort of the generic type advice that one gets. It would have been nice to have someone to bounce some ideas off of, even though I'm also an admin lawyer myself. And so I see this as a big step forward for the overall functioning and depth of the committee, because it will allow panels that even include me to get the benefit of full participation and input into decision making, as opposed to the sort of higher level advice. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you, Jill, for that great presentation. I echo Judy's sentiments, and I just wanted to state that I fully support this initiative. I think providing further support to the Disciplines Committee in handling the increased demands, I think, is a step in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Robin?
Hi, thank you to Peter and Judy and even Nancy for clarifying that difference. I haven't sat on the discipline committee, so I think that those added view and explanation, as well as Jill catering some of that, answered one of my questions on the difference between DILD and having this new thing. So thank you for all of those additions to the clarification. My question is just with regards to the numbers coming through and the drastic increase coming through, should we be looking at the landscape of where these disciplines, are these students from Canadian universities? Are these students that are coming in? I'm sitting on the registration committee, so there are loopholes sometimes happening. Are we seeing where these discipline situations are coming from and trying to make sure that our registration process is correct?
Robin, thanks for the opportunity to be able to answer that. We will be doing more of a deeper dive in terms of the reasons for the referrals and information about that. At this point in time, we do not have any responses to the demographics about the persons who have been referred. Frankly, we've been looking more at the issues. What are the reasons for the referral? What are the allegations that are being put forward? But certainly we will be taking a look to see what are some of the things that we can glean from these referrals. And if there are findings, what can we get from those pieces of information as well? So I anticipate we'll have that more as a report back through the discipline committee at a future date.
Thank you. Vivian?
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you, Jill, for the presentation. I was just wondering, for these SMEs, they're not really needed for every single panel. So before, it used to be just the external counsel for certain cases. I know you mentioned that the costs have been calculated, and just wondering if that makes any changes. And the second part is, if these SMEs sit on panels permanently, would that cut down on the work of public member and also professional members, like the number needed for these panels?
So Vivian, thank you. You raised the question about SMEs in terms of needing to be on every panel. One of the things that we're taking a cautious approach to is about the fact that we remove independent legal counsel from a supporting role for the discipline panels. It's difficult at times to predict when legal advice might be needed for a panel. And as such, I anticipate that our recommendation to the discipline committee chair is that she consider appointing these subject matter expert adjudicators to all of the panels. We can certainly look at that later to see if that's needed for everyone. But I believe that that's going to be staff's recommendation in case issues arise, even on uncontested matters, for which then someone well-versed in administrative law and someone who understands chairing duties could then provide assistance to the panel chair. And then in terms of looking at the numbers of persons, yes, this SME adjudicator would be taking one spot from either a professional member or a public member. There are minimum requirements in the law where we have to have a professional member of council and we have to have a public member, an LGIC, on discipline committee, plus we have to reach quorum. And so I anticipate that an adjudicator would be put on for one of the uncontested proceedings as well as contested proceedings. And depending on the issues and what the discipline committee chair says in terms of who needs to be on that, that may substitute out one professional member or one public member. That'll be up to the discretion of the chair.
Thank you. Ellie?
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the discussion. I just like to ask, what specific background, educational or other, do the SMEs have? Is there something you can point to that's the same across the board? Or
Ellie, I think the common denominator for this person or this role will be someone who is an expert in administrative law. And usually that's someone who will have already potentially given advice to other kinds of tribunals, be they health regulators or others. But the background will consistently be someone who has administrative law background. In terms of other competencies or other diversity measures, that's something that we will certainly be taking advice on when we start thinking about what would be the competencies for these adjudicator members.
Thank you. Anthony Lisho.
Thank you, Hanno. And Jillian, thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening, and I am encouraged by the possibility of streamlining and enhancing the effectiveness of the discipline committee in the future. So I'm totally in favor in continuing to explore this new avenue or this new process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jillian, for your presentation and your answers to the questions that were raised. If I could have motion number 4 on the screen now, please. Council for your consideration. Motion number 4, that Council directs staff to bring proposed bylaw changes to Council's meeting in September 2024 to appoint SME adjudicators to the Discipline Committee. And that is moved by Anthony Lisho, seconded by Ram. All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand. And that is carried. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We are going to skip item number 11 and 12 on our agenda right now, and we're going to move directly to item number 13, which is an education session. And today we are focusing on how to weave Indigenous ways of knowing and being into the work to enhance Council's equity, diversity, and inclusion competence. We are delighted to have Louise Arts join us from British Columbia. And for a more formal introduction, I'm going to turn it over to you, Harinder. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Louis is currently the Chief Officer, Strategy, Governance, and Reconciliation at the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives. Throughout her long career, Louis has been committed to governing the practice of health professionals, focusing on addressing Indigenous-specific racism. She promotes equity and fairness in decision-making through due process and interprofessional collaboration. As Registrar and Executive Director of the College of Midwives of BC, Louis led the regulator through a period of transformation. That work included changes to the midwives regulation, a complete revision of the bylaws, as well as an amalgamation with the BC College of Nursing Professionals. Louis led the work to create BCCNM's Cultural Safety and Humility Action Plan. She worked closely with First Nation elders and advisors upon whose territories and lands the college works. Louis supports our board, committees, and organizations on strategy and governance matters. Her reconciliation work helps to ensure that the critical concepts of reconciliation, equity, diversity, and inclusion will be integrated into all aspects of BCCNM's work. Louis, I know you have a lot to tell us about your current work. Council and all of us here are watching from the college staff and the public. We are keen to hear from you. Welcome, and thank you so much for making time to speak with us. Louis Art, please.
Thank you very much, Harinder, and to the board, thank you for inviting me here today. Again, my name is Louise Arts, and it's my pleasure to share with you some of the ways that we're weaving Indigenous ways of knowing and being into our work here at the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. Just to place myself, I am a settler here in these territories of Dutch and Irish descent, and am a learner in this space. So I may come across like I know a thing of two, hopefully, in this presentation, but I also want to acknowledge that I am a continuous learner, constantly make mistakes in this work, and have learned humility as being a big piece of cultural safety and humility and reconciliation work. So happy to share some of those fails as well as some of our successes to help you think about how you can start to decolonize your processes or continue on that journey as it may be. So if we can jump to the next slide. And thank you to the team for running me through this. I'd like to start us in the right way with a territorial acknowledgement of where I'm coming from. And I would also add that our territorial acknowledgement actually has been evolving as we've gone through this journey. So we started at BCCNM with our board, our staff and committees with a fairly basic territorial acknowledgement that acknowledged the 3 First Nations. where our office is located. And once staff were more comfortable and our board with that, we added in an acknowledgement of the language groups that are used by those nations. It was a way to further our learning. It required us to learn how to say a couple words in those traditional languages. And it brought us out of our comfort zone a little bit in that regard. And as we continue to engage and develop meaningful relationships and partnerships with these local First Nations, we also continue to evolve our territorial acknowledgement. So we recently evolved it again, and we've now added language that's distinctions and rights-based, and it's title-focused with inherent rights being centered. So you will see that in addition to acknowledging territory, we now acknowledge the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP, which states, for example, Indigenous people have the right to their traditional medicines, to maintain health practices, including the conservation of their vital medicinal plants, animals, and minerals. Indigenous individuals also have the right to access, without any discrimination, all social and health services. So to acknowledge UNDRIP in this way is to implement these articles into our work, into our strategic planning, into our public commitments that we have accepted UNDRIP and are committed to upholding it. And as you know, UNDRIP is a international piece of legislation that has been endorsed by our Canadian government. So it is something that would hold to you too in Ontario. And some of the stuff that I'll talk about today is BC focused, but I definitely would say it is going to extend across Canada. So with that little preamble, the way our territorial acknowledgement looks now is that we would acknowledge the rights and titles of the First Nations whose collective unceded territories encompass the land-based colonially known as British Columbia. And we give special thanks to the Hunkaminam speaking peoples, the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh nations, as well as the Squamish-Snatcham speaking peoples, the Squamish Nation, on whose unceded territories BCCNM's office is located. We also give thanks for the medicines of these territories and recognize that laws, governance, and health systems tied to these lands and waters have existed here for over 9,000 years. We also acknowledge the unique and distinct rights, including rights to health and wellness, of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from elsewhere in Canada who now live in British Columbia. As leaders in the settler healthcare system, we acknowledge our responsibility to these rights under international, national, and provincial law. And what you can see on the screen is a map of British Columbia that shows the different territorial groupings. We have over 200 distinct First Nations in BC, but you can see that their lands cover every inch of British Columbia. So an important recognition. Can we jump to the next slide, please? All right, so I'm going to take you through an overview of our journey, and you'll hear me refer to this as a journey. We've also, as we've done this work, Indigenous people have shared with us an analogy to a canoe. So a lot of this is about climbing in the canoe and paddling to get this work done. And so you'll hear that throughout my presentation here today. In the spirit of time, I actually took out buckets and baskets and forgot to take it out of the agenda, but if we have time, I'll jump back to it. But I really wanted to talk about how we work with elders and knowledge keepers. I want to talk to you about our Safe Spaces project, and then get into those untying of colonial knots. So how are we decolonizing? How are we weaving Indigenous ways of knowing and being? What are some real tangible examples of how we do that at the board table and here in the organization as we regulate nurses and midwives in BC? So next slide, please. So to give you a sense of the journey, I'm going to walk you through this canoe journey. So our work here really started in around March of 2017. when all of the health regulatory colleges here in BC signed a declaration of commitment to cultural safety and humility in the regulation of health professionals in BC. That was a partnership with the First Nations Health Authority here in BC, and it was the beginning of our learning and journey. And I would say we tried to take this declaration and be committed to it. And there's a number of things that we did in the ensuing years. However, it was November of 2020 with the publication of the In Plain Sight report that things really started to be recognized and changed in terms of the devastating impact that racism was having on Indigenous people in our healthcare system in BC. If you have not read the In Plain Sight report, I highly recommend you do so. And if you want to do a follow-up to this, Harmony Johnson, who is one of the authors of the report, does an amazing presentation that dives into it. But the quick version is that the BC government authorized an investigation. And you might recall it was in the news back that there was allegations that there were games happening in the ERs where people were guessing the blood alcohol content of Indigenous people as they came into the emergency room. And so the government authorized an investigation into this, and a huge investigation happened. It actually turned out that there wasn't a pervasive situation of this game. However, it did uncover devastating impacts that racism was happening to Indigenous people and directly impacting their health outcomes. And this was an interesting finding as a regulator. We had always addressed concerns or complaints that came forward around racism. However, it was considered more along the lines of unprofessional conduct, right? Maybe along the lines of being rude or short or inappropriate. But this report was able to tie the racist behaviors to adverse health outcomes in a way that made that connection that this is actually, oh gosh, and now I've lost the word, but an inability to do your practice. This is actually where you're not able to practice. I don't know why. Does anyone want to jump in and help me with the word? I'm lost right now, but anyways, I think you understand the point. And so that made a huge difference in terms of, as a regulator, then, we're not dealing with just unprofessional conduct, but we're dealing with that inability to practice safely. So one of the recommendations from the In Plain Sight report was to apologize. And so the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the College of Pharmacists, and the College of Dental Surgeons in BC, and ourselves got together, and just to note, those are the 4 largest regulatory colleges in BC. And we issued an apology to Indigenous people and communities with regards to the racism that they have encountered in engaging with us and the healthcare professionals whom we regulate. Others have gone on, all the other colleges went on to issue apologies as well. And that became a real catalyst for action, in the sense that we don't want to issue an apology and then have that be the only thing, but actually be able to do updates. And so we have done so. That's showing that we did one in May, we did one the following June, and there would be another one coming right around now. Another piece that we did from this is we wrote then a commitment to action. So in addition to the apology, which was actually one of the actions, the In Plain Sight report made 24 recommendations to the system to address Indigenous specific racism. 4 actually called out health regulators but when we looked at it, we found 8 of the recommendations could apply to us and our work. And so we wrote an action plan called the Constructive Disruption, an action plan for addressing Indigenous specific racism with nurses and midwives in BC. And that became a playbook for us to action those recommendations. One of which was to create a new practice standard. So as I said earlier, I would suggest that we always would have said our standards included not to be racist in your practice. However, what we discovered from the report and from the investigation is that that was not clear enough. And we needed to be more direct, and we needed to do more education and training around what it means to provide culturally safe care. And so we wrote a joint standard with our college and the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which was the first time that we had done a joint standard like that. Our board met jointly to create the concept for this, and then staff worked together to do so. And so we launched a new practice standard on Indigenous cultural safety, cultural humility, and anti-racism. It sets clear standards of expectations of practice for nurses, physicians, midwives, and surgeons to provide culturally safe, competent care. It had an accompanying video series and a companion guide. And I'm going to show you where you can find all these things on our website in a subsequent slide, because the companion guide itself is an excellent document, and any of these standards can apply to any of us as humans in how we interact in this world. And so I do really recommend a look at that. In February of 2022, we had the First Nations Health Authority gift a case study of racism. So Keegan Coombs was a First Nations person who died as a result of racism that he experienced when he sought care. That case study is available because the First Nations Health Authority and Keegan's family wanted to use it as a place of learning. So how can Keegan's death be used to help ensure that this doesn't happen again? To our knowledge, it was the first of its kind. It's been amazing in terms of our staff being able to use the case study as a learning guide. We've taken our inquiry committee through it as a learning tool for how to handle a complaint around Indigenous specific racism. So again, it was a tragic situation and a real gift to all of us in terms of learning what is that systemic all round, because it wasn't just one person in the encounter, it was many pieces of the system and the people that led to Keegan's death. Next slide, please. Another one of the recommendations from In Plain Sight and from our action plan was to review our complaints process. So what the In Plain Sight report found was that there were thousands and thousands and thousands of complaints of Indigenous specific racism that we were not receiving at the college, at any of the colleges. What was coming through was a very tiny percent of what was being experienced as determined by these health outcomes that they were able to tie the behaviors to. And so we realized that our complaints process wasn't safe or accessible, and for many reasons, including institutional trauma and experiences in the healthcare system, Indigenous people weren't feeling safe to bring these complaints forward, or they felt like nothing would happen. The report gets into that detail in quite a impactful way. And so we put out an RFP and hired an Indigenous company to review our complaints process to ensure that we could make it more safe. We had the review and we did release the report, and we've worked those recommendations into our action plans and are in the process still of rolling that out to make our complaints process safer. Around the same time in BC, our government released DRIPA, which is the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, and it lays out 89 priorities to advance the work to meet UNDRIP and what will happen over the next 5 years in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous people. Also, at the same time, we were understanding that we were getting a new piece of legislation, so a new umbrella legislation for health regulation in BC. It's called the Health Professions and Occupations Act. It received royal assent in November, but it has not yet been enacted. It has done a number of things and a number of transformations in health regulation, including amalgamations, which you may have heard about. So in BC, we had 22 health regulatory colleges, and by the 28th of this month, there will be 6. So many colleges have amalgamated into 6. But in terms of this presentation, what is very significant is the new Health Professions and Occupations Act under Section 14 has guiding principles that the colleges and the boards are responsible to act to. And they include principles around anti-racism, addressing Indigenous-specific racism, anti-discrimination, and so on. So it is a much more, I love it when I lose words, much more depicted, scripted, direct calling out of the responsibilities of a health regulator in this space. We aren't 100% sure when it's going to be enacted. All the colleges are working to get ready to be compliant under the HPOA, but we're thinking maybe around another year-ish until we are fully under the HPOA. And then I'm getting to the end here and almost live to time. So in April of 23, we updated or refreshed our action plan. So as you recall, we did the action plan with 8 recommendations from In Plain Sight. We then had the Novatone report, which was the complaints report. We also wanted to look at the recommendations that came from the Murdered and Missing Women, Indigenous Women and Girls report. And so we did a refresh of our action plan, and we call that one Redressing Harm to Indigenous People in the Healthcare System. And so any of the recommendations we hadn't finished from the first action plan we brought forward, and then we wove in some of the new recommendations from those new source documents. All right. So that really takes us through the journey of how we got to the place where this is such a focus. This is a key part of our strategic plan. So if we jump to the next slide, I wanted to talk to you about working with elders, knowledge keepers, and advisors. And I'll just quickly orientate you to what you're seeing here. So the picture on the left-hand side is Sequoia and Wannock, who is an elder and knowledge carrier from Squamish Nation, and a knowledge carrier and elder advisors for many organizations, including BCCNM. And in this picture, she's blanketing Gabriel George for some work that they're about to do for our college. And Gabe is a knowledge holder from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. If you go up to like 12 o'clock, This is obviously a WebEx photo that I captured at one point. And so you see Sequoia on the top right. Beneath her is Sulkson. Sulkson, Shane Point, is a knowledge keeper and proud member of the entire Salish Nation, the Point family, and the Musqueam Indian Band. And in addition to being a grandfather and a great-grandfather, he's a facilitator, advisor, traditional speaker, and artist, and a knowledge keeper who works very closely with our board. And also in that photo is Joe Gallagher, Quinnaman from the Tla'amin Nation. He's the owner and operator of Quoquote Consulting, which is an Indigenous First Nations consulting company. And he is BCC&M's Indigenous advisor. He's also the VP of Indigenous Health at our Provincial Health Services Authority. And he was the founding CEO at the First Nations Health Authority, which is the largest First Nations owned and run public service in the country. The next picture is me and Sulkson. So if we keep going clockwise, this was at Orange Shirt Day. You can see Sequoia second in there. Cynthia, who's our CEO, and to the far right is Rochelle Coy, who's a member of the Sakanaman First Nation, and she's an external relations strategist and a facilitator. She gave a keynote presentation, and she supports us in our comms and our communications side of things. And then rounding it out is a picture of Rihanna, who is one of my staff. She's a Métis woman who works as in our team of reconciliation as an Indigenous consultant here, and that's her with Sequoia. So elders and knowledge keepers are Indigenous individuals that are held in high regard in their community because of their vast spiritual and cultural knowledge. They're not self-taught, they're gifted with these respective traditions, teachings, and knowledge that's passed down to them by other elders and knowledge keepers through generations of that oral history, mentorship, teaching of Indigenous customs and traditions. And what we do is we engage with elders and knowledge keepers to learn Indigenous knowledge and teachings. We have a knowledge keeper come to our board meetings, always to any symposia, to research. And the way you work with elders and knowledge keepers is different. They all come with their own unique skills and gifts and traditional practices and ceremonial protocols. Some are going to offer a welcome, an opening, or a closing. Others may share a song, a teaching, history, or provide thoughts on protocols and such. So some of the ways we do this is they may give a territorial welcome or open to a start of an event or a meeting. They may open or close with a prayer or just, and in First Nation language or words here, they would say just starting in the right way. They may lead us in ceremony, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. They provide consultation and guidance in areas such as governance, policy development, program redesign. They act as witness to our events, which is a part of that Indigenous culture, where through that oral history, it's really important that you have someone who witnesses your work and then who can bring you back to that work or to those commitments. They facilitate learning and healing through sharing circles and ceremonies. And a big piece is they support Indigenous participants at a meeting or event or gathering. So they can be there to do that. We ensure that honoraria is provided. This is communicated in advance. And we did have to create specific financial policies that would be specific to ensuring that we're doing this in a culturally safe manner. We do provide those open access for anyone who might be interested in doing something similar. So again, I'll show you where those are. so we did have to untie some colonial knots as we started this work, which is what we call, what happens when our finance team says, well, we need to have a social insurance number, and we need to have the bank account, and we need to have this in advance, and we can only make a payment 2 weeks later. And in ceremony, which is a very unique thing, and I can share, as a settler, I found different, they pin the cash on, and I don't know if you can see it I don't think we've got to that stage yet in the picture with Gabe George there, but in ceremony, the cash is actually pinned to that blanket in an open display way. So I don't know if you're in the same boat, but asking finance to come up with this cash in advance for this meeting with no paper trail wasn't the easiest piece. And so we did have to untie those colonial knots and do that. And the other thing I just want to say is, it's not like there's a 1-800 number, hand me a knowledge keeper. This takes building relationships. This takes building trust with Indigenous communities, to have them want to work with you, to be able to work on this journey together. And so I do have tips and tricks on how to start those relationships, but I want to acknowledge that is a part of this work and journey. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to really quickly show you, this is our website. Under for the public, on the top left, if you click or hover over that and then choose cultural safety and humility, and then publications, this is where you will see many of these documents that I've referred to over the course of this presentation. So our first action plan, the constructive disruption, our current action plan, redressing harm, the report that we received from our complaints review, the practice standards that I referred to, including the companion documents and the video series. And under that, which you can't see on my screen capture, is the guideline for working with Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, and an honorary and expense reimbursement policy for Indigenous services. So again, we provide all that open access. You're welcome to adapt and adopt, or however you like. We are happy to share what we can. All right, next slide. So I really wanted to take a moment to talk about our Safe Spaces project. So we, as part of our recommendations and part of the recommendations from In Plain Sight, was to increase Indigenous leadership in our spaces. And one of the ways that we sought to do that was to increase the number of Indigenous people on our boards and committees. It was one of the most tangible and quickest ways that we felt we could increase Indigenous thought leadership in that way. We also want to do it in terms of staff and positions, but sometimes that can take a little bit longer. And so we sought to increase the number of Indigenous people on our board and committees. We have a board of 10. I feel like your board might be a little bit larger just based on what I see on the screen. We have a board of 10, and right now we have 5 Indigenous board members and 5 non-Indigenous board members. 7 out of the 10 are racialized, 3 not. And in that we have, in BC, we have half are appointed by government, and right now half are elected. With the new legislation that I referred to, they will all be appointed positions, but at present that's the case. And so we have 4 of our elected positions are Indigenous board members, and 1 of our public appointees is an Indigenous board member. And we were also successful in increasing, we had set a target of having 10% Indigenous representation at our committees. And we have been able to achieve that through concerted recruitment and retention efforts. and I will mention a couple of those further in the slides. What we found, however, and the way I sometimes describe this is if you get a whole bunch of like-minded people in a room, you kind of make your way to a decision, and it's not too difficult, and it's not too rife with conflict because everybody's kind of thinking the same thing. Once you bring in all these diverse opinions and lived experiences, you have a much more robust discussion and dialogue. And all studies show you come to better decision making, but it's a little bit less smooth as you get there. And what we found was that our Indigenous board and committee members were experiencing harm. They were experiencing racism at our board and committee tables. And as the governance professional at this organization, I couldn't always see it. I couldn't see what was happening that was creating the harm. And I'm going to give you one quick example that came out of this because it was just so illustrative to me. So our board are able to seek compensation for their time in doing board work for us, and we have a process for them to submit hours. We cover prep, meeting time, and so on. And I had one of our Indigenous board members who would just never submit hours. And I would chase them down, and my staff, but eventually me, would be like, okay, we need to close our books for the year. We haven't had any payment, like you haven't submitted, you say you're going to, and nothing. And finally, after this process of creating a safe space to share, this Indigenous board member shared that their whole life they have been stereotyped as being an Indigenous person who's always trying to get free money, who's always trying to scam the system, who's always trying to, get what they're not deserved. And that lifetime of being stereotyped like that made them afraid to use our policy. And they were afraid that they were accidentally going to put in for something that they hadn't been at or something. And we would all think, oh, they're just trying to scam us. They're just trying to get money from us. And it was so enlightening to me because I would never have imagined that. And I would never have guessed that a systemic racist system and thoughts and prevalence had created that insecurity around what I thought was a pretty standard policy on how to get reimbursed for the time you spent. And so it was so enlightening, and we were able to change our reimbursement policy, and we added more examples in to illustrate how you would use the policy in this way that made it safer for our Indigenous board members. But what was happening was I wasn't seeing it. I knew it was happening. I didn't understand why. I also knew it wasn't the Indigenous people's place to have to teach me this, and I couldn't learn it if they didn't share it with me. And so I really thought, how can we create a safe space where Indigenous board and committee members can safely share the harms that they're experiencing, share those experiences in a way where we can learn what it is that's happening and be able to create safety. And so there's sort of a double entendre on our Safe Spaces project. How can we create a safe enough space for them to share so that we can learn and create a safe space for them to be at our board and committee tables? So we worked with Quote Consulting, so Joe Gallagher's company, and we looked to create a project that would illuminate how Indigenous specific racism, white supremacy, and cultural insafety operated at our table, to hear from our Indigenous board and committee members, and then to figure out how we would develop a policy, a standard, an action plan to address it. And we opened this up to all of the health regulatory colleges. In BC, we funded and organized it, but we invited any of the colleges who had Indigenous board or committee members to participate. And 13 brave board and committee members did so, and they came together. We had a dialogue series with 6 different sessions, some with the Indigenous Board and Committee members, some without. But they were able to share their experiences with Quoquote, and we were able to come together. We used Coast Salish Big House protocols to do that. So even in our meeting space, we created the space so that it would be like we were in a big house. And we were able to do the work that was guided by and grounded in the laws of the lands where we are. We are embarking on a speaking tour about the results of this Safe Spaces project. The whole idea was, if we can get, you know, these brave board and committee members to share their harms, hopefully we can then disseminate our learnings widely and broadly so that other people don't have to A, experience them, or B, revisit them by having to share that. So it's a plug and to your staff. We'll be presenting at CNAR and CLEAR and at the Governance Professionals of Canada. But maybe it's a follow-up if you found this valuable. All right, next slide, please. I talked about Indigenous thought leadership and how we really wanted to increase our numbers. And one of the ways that we sought to do this was to create an Indigenous community of practice for our board and committee members. So first, I'll just set the scene here. So you're looking at Janine Erickson. Janine is a Deaf woman from a First Nation community in Northern BC, an adopted member of the Takaya Wolf Clan. She is one of our board members, and she's a member of the Community of Practice and the Indigenous Engagement Group, which I'll get to. She also serves on the Inquiry Committee at the College of Physicians and Surgeons. So Janine is definitely a strong First Nations voice doing work in this space. So the Community of Practice is made up of Indigenous registrants and public members like Janine, who hold positions on BC Health Regulatory Boards and work with what we call the BC Health Regulator Group colleges. The whole concept is to provide support, relationships, to maintain and build strength, energy, and wellness for Indigenous people who are doing this important reconciliation work with boards and committees. And it brings together the wisdom and strength of Indigenous health leaders that inform structural, systemic, and service level changes. The Community of Practice meets monthly online. We provide honoraria to members who participate. They also do one gathering together every year, and that just happened, and it was an amazing success. Not that I was there, because it's totally for the Indigenous people, but Rihanna, my Indigenous staff person, was there and spoke to just the value of this, and to recognize that for many of these people, they're the only Indigenous person on a board or committee. They're alone in this space. They're in spaces where they haven't been invited to before. And there is a lot going on there that they are able to share and gather strength. It's facilitated by Joe Gallagher, our Indigenous advisor, and supported by Rihanna, our Indigenous staff person. As I say, such a place. And what it also is a recruitment. So in addition to the retention idea around, they have this community of practice to share and build and strengthen from, but it's also a recruitment technique in the sense that when we're recruiting Indigenous people to our boards, we can say, and you'll have access to this community of practice. You'll have access to these monthly sessions with Joe and these other Indigenous thought leaders in this industry, and it becomes an important recruiting tool. Then at the same time, this group also decided that they were interested in doing some engagement. And so the community of practice is very much for them, about them. But we realized we had this amazing group of Indigenous people who understood regulation. And that's a bit of a tough place to find. And so they created a separate group. It's the same people, but in order to keep the separation, they created a separate group to talk about engagement. So any health regulatory college in BC, in fact, across Canada, could ask to engage with this group. So they might have a policy they're looking at, they might be looking to update their space, any number of different pieces. They can engage with this Indigenous engagement group who can give feedback on their pieces. All right, I'm going to speed it up. I have just a couple more slides. Next slide, please. So just to say another one of the recommendations from our action plan and in plain sight is about making Indigenous people feel seen and reflected in our spaces. And the recommendation from in plain sight was really around hospitals, but we felt like we could take the same thing and apply it to our offices. So if we had registrants coming in or members of the public, even on our website, we want them to feel seen. And so we have gone through a process to acquire Indigenous art from our local nations. I can say this is an excellent opportunity to build relationships, to make connections in community, and it also speaks to accountability. So when you, and the picture on the top left is with the College of Chiropractors who share space in our hub, and they commissioned that piece, and the artist is there. And they had a ceremony to hand off this piece to the college. They drummed a song into the piece. And so when you see that piece in our office, you're reminded of that relationship, and you're reminded of the joint accountability to do work in this space. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so just a few of the ways that we continue to do this, of untying colonial knots and weaving Indigenous ways of knowing and being. When we recruit for Indigenous specific roles, we needed to create a process that would allow for a safe recruitment into staff roles, also into board and committee roles. One of the things that you can see in our board meetings is the use of circle protocol. So this circle protocol is a tradition that the knowledge around it was gifted to us, and it is a way that Indigenous people organize in their meetings to ensure that every voice is heard. And so often our opening circle, we use circle protocol. And so what that means is that every single person goes around the circle. You never interrupt, you never go backwards. It is important that you go around. As a settler, I can tell you I was very uncomfortable with circle to start. I always wanted to like jump in on what they said, or I had already had a turn and then someone said something really great that made me think of something else and I wanted to get that in. And but you realize the value of not having someone like me with a dominant voice and thought be able to take over like that. You recognize the value of moving through in this way. Again, from a colonial perspective, though, it can take time and it's unpredictable. So when you have an agenda and you have a time frame on the agenda, it's a very colonial aspect, time in that way. And it can be a very white supremacist piece to have that sense of urgency and that piece. So we had to learn to build buffers into our agenda. We had to learn how to say, okay, look, we're looking at this agenda. One, where would circle protocol fit? Okay, great. And this is a meeting we have with our CEO, myself, the chair and vice chair before a board meeting. And then we say, if we're starting to run out of time somewhere because we've gone over, what can easily come off and be an email vote after? What can we move to the next one? It's here, but it doesn't. And so we just actually really think that through in advance so that we're not stuck in that sense of urgency. Oath of office and blanketing ceremony. We have here in BC a requirement when you join the board that you have to declare or solemnly swear an oath of office. And we find it very colonial, very stuffy. Excuse me. And actually, if you could jump to the next slide, if what we have found in Indigenous teachings is they have a blanket ceremony. And the blanket ceremony is a place where you are wrapped in a blanket and you have a band tied around your head. It doesn't photo very well, so the board here have taken their headbands off for this part. But the tie around the head is to speak to the brain work, the amount of work and thoughts and effort that needs to go into what's happening. And the blanket wraps around and covers your heart to speak to the heart work of this journey. And how you're blanketed in different ways can have different meanings and such. And so we have all our new board members go through a blanket ceremony when they come to commit to the work that they have in front of you, to have it witnessed by witnesses who can then be recalled to bring you back to your commitment to the work. And we find it just so much more valuable to the commitment than an oath of office. And so that's our board with Silkson, our knowledge carrier, and they're all proudly wearing their blankets that they were blanketed with as they started on as a board. All right, last slide is just to leave you with that canoe analogy and a quote from our registrar and CEO. We're working together, paddling in the same canoe. We'll be successful in contributing to the health system and well-being of British Columbians in a way previously unimagined. And that's just to say, it's not a super straightforward journey, but if we're all in the canoe, then we're making our way. So thank you so much for listening. I hope I've left a little bit of time for any questions that you might have for me or the work of our board in this space.
Thank you very much, Louise, for your presentation and your thoughtful words. I see at this point in time, Ram does have his hand up. So Ram, I'm going to go to you first, please.
Great presentation, Louis. You really brought a lot of issues, including the racism in healthcare system. You touched upon culture, traditions of Indigenous people. I think I just want to acknowledge that this is an excellent report, and we got to learn a lot from it. And of course, all the colleges have implemented some of the work that is done in this report. And I think, although in Ontario, I don't think we have big study like that, but there is a lot to learn from this particular study. Thank you again. Excellent report.
Thank you. Ellie?
Good afternoon, Louise. Thank you so much for that beautiful presentation. I was just wondering, when you speak about the circle, is that the same thing as a healing circle with the talking stick, or is it something different? Where people pass around the talking stick and
yeah, it is. Let me just go back to, it is similar. It's not a healing circle. A healing circle would have a different reason for happening. It's meant to be a safe space for participants to share. Its circle protocol gives everyone an opportunity to share. They only speak when they're speaking, and everyone's listening intently with open hearts and minds, using their 3 ears, 2 in their head, 1 in their chest. Participants don't interrupt or interject when someone else is speaking. Often there is a stone or a feather or something that's passed as they speak. We don't always do that. Sometimes we have something, sometimes we don't at the board meeting. You don't skip, go backwards, out of order. If you don't want to speak, though, someone can say, I'd like to just pass, or all my relations is an example of how Indigenous people would do that. In a traditional circle, there would be 4 rounds. So 1 round is introductions, 2 rounds of the discussion point, and then a gratitude round at the end. And it's also a way of just learning local protocols. So in Coast Salish territory where we are, the circle goes to the right. But in the interior of BC, the circle goes to the left, and that's their protocol. And so it can be interesting. And it really, when you go back to our land acknowledgement about inherent rights and titles and the laws of the lands, we practice the Coast Salish way because that's the law of the land where we are, which is to go to the right. Even if we have guests, First Nations people from elsewhere, it's the laws of the local nations that we adhere to there. So similar, but different.
Thank you. Deborah?
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. I just have a question regarding measurement. I understand why all these tools were implemented and changes were made, and I absolutely applaud that for the initiative. Do you have a method to measure your progress, to see if more people are entering the system because they feel safer, because there's more representation? Are you measuring your progress compared to where you were prior to the implementation of these policies? Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. It's really tough piece. We do try. For the most part, there's an accepted theory that we'll know we're making progress when Indigenous people tell us we're making progress in that space. There are some measures. For example, we anticipate with the new practice standard and making our complaints process more accessible, we should see an increase in the number of complaints of Indigenous specific racism or racism in general. Not exactly a measure you're wanting to report, yay, we've got more complaints. But at the same time, it would be a measure of that. After the practice standard was released and the trainings and such, we do ask as part of our QA program how our registrants are doing in terms of addressing Indigenous specific racism and practicing to the standard. What we have found is 96% of them are awesome at it, which is a little bit of a concern in the sense that it's probably not likely that is the case. An interesting one with board and committee, when we started this work, we asked people how they were doing in this space, and they were doing really well, in a self-reflection kind of way. And then we did a concerted year of education and training and decolonizing. And when we did the committee and board evaluations the following year, the number plummeted. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. Like before I did all the education and training, they were excellent, and now they're here. But people realized what they didn't know. And actually seeing that was a true self-reflection, which is a big part of this process. And we have a team of measurement and evaluation specialists here at the college, and this is an active piece that we're going on right now to try and find more. And I can also share the board is really trying to hold Cynthia as our CEO in her performance evaluation to measures around this work. And we have scoured the world for a CEO measure like that, and we're having to create one because it doesn't exist yet.
Thank you.
So can you share with, sorry, can I just add one thing? Can you share with us what you found is your best measurement tool? Is it a questionnaire after the person's received service in the healthcare system where they leave their name? Is it one that's anonymous? Is it digital? Is it written? Is it verbal? Is it anecdotal? Like, how do you measure something like that? That accurately, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just so you know if you're heading in the right direction.
I think we haven't found that. So just to be upfront, and I think it'll probably take another, provincial-wide investigation to do that. There will be some measures, though, just in terms of those health outcomes. Are they improving? Are Indigenous people accessing care or accessing systems that they weren't before? Because that was a huge piece of what we saw, is due to their mistrust of the system, of the, when I go there, I experience racism, so why am I going back there? And so they're like or they leave early because they're being mistreated. If we could, those kinds of numbers would also be reflective of if there's been change in the system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much again, Louise. And at this point in time, Harinder, may I turn the floor over to you for some concluding remarks, please?
Well, Louise, thank you so much for sparing time for us. And we have, it's a lot to digest. We have made some efforts on our parts as well to acquaint ourselves with the Indigenous culture and how we can collaborate and make things better. And we will look towards your college and your organization, hopefully, to get, as you have mentioned in your talk, that we can share the information from what you have. So thank you very much again, and we look forward to work with you and your organization to acquaint ourselves better with this concept you have developed, and we welcome this opportunity. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of your meeting. Hope you get back on schedule.
Yeah, and for us, we're going to wish you a happy afternoon, but I'm thinking for you, it's going to be have a good morning.
That's right, 9:30 here. So just going to start my day.
Okay, thank you again.
Perfect. Bye now.
And Council, what we're going to do is we will be going back to items 11 and 12 on the agenda, but since they're going to be relatively short and information only, I'm going to suggest that instead we skip right now to access to care, which is item number 14 on your agenda. And as you've seen in the update on the strategic plan, the college's strategic project on access to care is well underway. Council has been receiving regular updates on this project. The update for this meeting will focus on an early consultation that the college held from January to April, where the college asked for input from public, the profession, and interested parties. The briefing notes are at pages 222 to 278 of your meeting package. It contains a summary of the feedback that the college received. This item is for Council's information, and we will allow time for Council members to discuss the results if they wish. Andrea Foti, Deputy Registrar, will lead off this conversation. So Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Great. Thank you, Hanno, and hi, Council. Nice to be with you today. I'm going to keep my comments fairly brief. As Hanno said, you have a comprehensive briefing note in your package. In a moment, I'm going to pass you to our project lead, Michelle Cabrera-Gali. I'll just highlight for Council that a key component to our Access to Care strategic project has been engagement. What you're going to hear about today is one engagement tactic we've used at really the front end of our work for 2024 and 2025, and that was to allow us to learn and get feedback at the very beginning of our work to really understand how dentists, how the public, how organizations who work in this space we're feeling about issues that we're going to be looking at around professionalism, around access to care issues, to getting some lived experience, and to really add that feedback into the mix, along with literature review, along with jurisdictional scans for the working group to consider. There are other engagement tactics that we will be using. You see some of those set out in the briefing note. We will continue to update council on this project as it unfolds. But for now, I'm going to turn you to Michelle Cabrera. Golly, Michelle's going to take you through what we heard through this consultation effort. So Michelle, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and for this opportunity to highlight some key points in the briefing note that you have before you. And just by way of introduction and reminder, and as Andrea already alluded to, the key focus in 2024 and beyond is really on the professional expectations area of focus within the strategic project. And you'll see the two deliverables noted here in the triangle. And then collaboration and engagement, and the strategies that we're using to engage and consult with different in order to hear different voices and contribute to this work are outlined in the circle. And in the interest of time, I won't go through every element, but you will see a description of these elements in your briefing materials. So I just want to focus just very briefly on the deliverables themselves. So council has directed that we develop 2 new college documents, the first being a professionalism guide. And the intention is to set out the principles, values, and duties of the profession. And the college does have already a code of ethics. So what we would be doing is looking to modernize our code of ethics and make it more comprehensive. And this is in line with what we're seeing other regulators do in terms of their professionalism documents. And we're not necessarily looking to create new principles, values, and duties, but it would be a way of setting out in one place what dentists are currently doing in terms of the values and principles that they're practicing in accordance with and the existing duties that they have. The second document that we're looking at creating is a new standard of practice on accepting new patients. And this document would set out the profession's legal, professional, and ethical obligations with respect to accepting patients into their practice. And the key objectives with both of these documents is really to set out something that reflects the college's public interest mandate, to provide guidance to dentists on the provision of culturally safe, inclusive, equitable, and accessible care that is free from discrimination. And the hope is that in doing so, this might improve access to oral health care in Ontario. So now turning to the consultation report, which is in your materials. As noted, the consultation was held earlier this year from January to April, and the method in which we received feedback was via an online survey, and a few respondents also replied to us directly by email. And we received a total of 628 responses, and you'll see here that the majority were from dentists, but the second largest respondent type was members of the public. So we heard from 82, and this includes some members of the Citizen Advisory Group. And this is a group of patients and caregivers that provide feedback and advice to Ontario health regulators. We also heard from quite a few other healthcare professionals and 27 organizations. And I've listed some of the organizational respondents here on the slide, and I won't read them all out, but you'll see we heard from public health units, from community health centers, from the Ontario Dental Association, from the Canadian Dental Protective Association, and the Ontario Oral Health Alliance. So I would say the feedback could be summarized on this slide. So we heard a diversity of perspectives on the issues we consulted on. And generally speaking, dentists and other respondents had different views on these issues. So I'm saying generally because there were a minority of dentists, for example, that felt the same way as members of the public or other healthcare professionals. So generally, the areas where they had divergent views were on dentists' obligations to treat patients who rely on publicly funded programs, on balance billing, and also on whether dentists should take steps within their practices to make fees more affordable for patients. And then the last theme that arose in the feedback was that we suspect that some may have interpreted our survey negatively. So this may be a result of what was going on in the environment at the time of the survey, which was the introduction of the Canadian Dental Care Plan, or the CDCP, and a lot of uncertainty in the environment as to how that would be implemented. So that may have influenced how people responded to our survey. Having said that, though, there was general support for many of the issues or topics or concepts that we consulted on. So, for example, there was support for the definition of professionalism that we had set out from the Academies of Canadian Faculties of Dentistry. There was broad support for the principles and values of dental professionalism that we had provided as examples in the survey. There was a general sentiment that upholding the social contract was an important concept in dental professionalism. And there was support for many of the potential activities that dentists could engage in to promote equitable access to care. There was also support for the Canadian Dental Association duties, and those include duty to patients, duty to the profession, duty to society, and duty to themselves. And then there was broad support for the duties and responsibilities that we had set out as examples related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. In terms of the themes that arose in the open-ended comments, so we left lots of open space for respondents to tell us, to elaborate on their answers to the multiple choice questions, for example. And I'd say the biggest theme that arose in many of the open-ended comments were regarding financial concerns. So we heard that dentists are concerned about the financial viability of their practices, that they should be remunerated appropriately, that they should not be subsidizing care or providing care at a loss. So these were some common concerns that arose. We also heard concerns about the public programs themselves, so that they don't pay dentists enough, that there are administrative burdens associated with the public programs. In the open-ended comments, we also heard divergent views on dentists' obligation to treat patients. And then we also heard from a variety of different respondent types about difficulties that patients were having accessing oral health care in Ontario. Another theme was that the government should be responsible for improving access to oral health care and not dentists. There was a theme about quality. So the perception that, you know, if the service costs less or you pay dentists less for the service, the quality of the service would be lower. And then another theme that arose was that the survey was poorly written, biased, and offensive towards dentists. We also asked a few questions about patient experience. So I'll just briefly share what the results were here. So as I mentioned, we heard from 82 members of the public, and these questions were just asked of the respondents who identified as members of the public. And we found that most do not rely on a publicly funded government program. And most of the respondents had not experienced any barriers accessing oral health care. And I think what this slide demonstrates is, despite our best efforts, we have not heard from the most underserved patient populations in Ontario via the survey. So what we need to do, and what the working group is doing is considering the research that we have regarding access to oral health care in Ontario. And then also one of the reasons why we're embarking on many different strategies in order to try to hear those diverse voices of patients in Ontario and from the caregivers that, or the healthcare providers that provide service to them. So the working group will have a complete picture of what experiences the Ontario public have in regards to access to oral health care. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the consultation feedback, but I'll turn it over to Hanno now to manage the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And are there council members who have reactions, responses to make to the survey results that you've just seen? Anthony Mayer.
Thank you, Hanno. I was hoping not to be first. Thank you for the presentation. When I read the note, I was just really, I have to say, genuinely disappointed that we're actually looking at graphs involving only 82 members of the public, and it seems to be a very specifically skewed group. There's 15 million people in Ontario. So when you have 500 dentists out of 10,000, you have a 5% of the population. It gives you a pretty representative idea of how that population is feeling in that particular time, which is a time where the CDCP is being implemented. And that's an appropriate notification. But, 82 people, I don't think it tells us anything, to be honest. And I think if we really want to get a handle on this, this is a preliminary step, but we need to take more thorough steps to get a more comprehensive view of what the actual, a representative population of the people of Ontario feel. And my second point to this is that I think some of the questions were asked in a certain way that were likely to create this significant divide in the answers, whereas if the questions had more perspective. For example, all the dentists who are responding to the question have the perspective about what it costs to run a dental office and have the perspective of sometimes that when they take some of these patients, they're actually going to be supplementing or losing money. But some of the respondents, the non-dentist respondents, do not have that perspective. And if the question is not asked in such a way to say, the current general dentist in Ontario runs an overhead of 65 or 70%. So if they accept a patient and they're only going to be reimbursed 60%, they're actually losing money. How do we feel about that? That's a much more appropriate question to ask than should they just be taking these patients? So I feel like we really need to narrow this thing so that we actually get the proper information so we can make the proper decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Hanno, I wonder if I could just
Please
respond. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Anthony, for the thoughts. Really helpful. I wanted to, on your point about the public, absolutely, we were hoping for a greater rate of response from the public, for sure. One of the tactics we're going to be exploring over the back half of 2024 is doing some public polling with a market research firm so that we can try to get, ideally, a representative sample of Ontarians, so we have that feedback. Because I agree. I mean, that rate of response is low, and it as Michelle showed, it doesn't capture a lot of people who do actually have lived experiences with the social programs. So we're going to work on that, and we're going to work on other tactics as well to try to reach the public. So I wanted to give council that information and you that information. And thank you also for your comments on the questions. And yes, we did have a conversation with the executive committee about how we can be thinking about questions. Obviously, you know, we tried to be as thoughtful as we could in terms of framing the questions neutrally, seeing the reaction and the comments. We didn't hit the mark on some of those questions. We're going to be thinking about our process going forward and how we can build that out, and try to think about the context we can deliver. So I wanted you to know that as well, and just really thank you for the feedback and the perspective.
Thank you for your questions, Anthony, and Andrea, thank you for that response. I have no one else on the list, so at this point in time, I would like to thank staff as well for their work in this and the presentation. Council, at this point in time, I'm going to ask that we return to item number 11 on the agenda, which is the RCDSO strategic plan. And this report is a regular feature of council meetings. It will provide council with a summary of projects and a status report containing highlights of ongoing projects. The materials for this item are on pages 167 to 188 of your meeting package, and this matter is for information only, and I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to walk you through.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I'll keep my comments brief. This is the report that you get each council meeting. I think the goal here is to really make sure council maintains a connection to the strategic plan, to the strategic projects, and you have different opportunities to really see how this work in your direction to us as staff is unfolding. I'm going to just pick some highlights out, and I'm looking at the chart, the status at a glance, the chart sort of entries for each project, and that's starting on, I believe it's page 169 of your package. Progress on the standards strategic project. You can see some updates here. We have a talented standing working group of council members and others who are guiding this work. That's underway. So there's active work going on by staff and the working group on our slate of standards reviews. So more to come on that. You have some more detail in the policy report as well, which is in the consent agenda. Access to care we just talked about, so I'm not going to spend any time there other than to just flag for you, in addition to the work that Michelle has just taken you through, we are operating in tandem with the Quality Assurance Committee and Susan Taylor, our Director of Quality, to do some really exciting work to expand offers for CE points and touch on different equity deserving populations. So lots of great work happening in concert with that committee. Our service experience, led by Michelle Tremblay, you can see here work is underway to update our member resource portal, and we're really focusing on some training for our frontline staff to focus on different ways, and particularly trauma-informed approaches to really assist with our interactions with a whole host of individuals who contact us. In terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, also led by Michelle Tremblay, lots of really great work happening here. We have an internal staff committee that is leading an approach on evaluating our internal policies from the EDI lens. We've heard a bit about the governance committee and its approach on EDI initiatives. You know, another exciting development that I'll touch on, because it is Pride Month, is that staff have engaged with Rainbow Health Ontario. And for those of you not familiar with that organization, they're a really fantastic organization focusing on healthcare needs of the 2S LGBTQ plus community. So, governance review and modernization led by Dana Simon and Laura Thacker. You heard from Anne Coughlin share this morning, so I won't spend time on this. You've already discussed it. Last but certainly not least, our project lead, Denny Ogavundi, is hard at work on our practice models and corporate dentistry project. And specifically, we're looking and really being informed by some work that the Ontario College of Pharmacists are doing around corporate influence in pharmacy. Denny is also engaging in really comprehensive research and literature reviews. So you'll be hearing more on that at some future meetings. So also there is, of course, as always, a strategic dashboard attached. I won't take you through that, but you can see there how we're progressing based on some KPIs. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you, Andrea. And Council, any comments or questions for what you've seen and heard from Andrea? Thank you. If we could then move on to item number 12 on our agenda, which is committee reports, and this is for Council's information. The 2023 committee reports are included in your package, starting at page 189 with the Discipline Committee report and finishing at page 221 with the Registration Committee report. What I propose to do is go through the reports one at a time in case there are any questions. I will go in the order in which the information items were listed in your materials. I will highlight the name of the committee, and if there are questions, I will pause to see if there are any questions and then direct them to the appropriate person. So the first committee I would ask you to consider is the Discipline Committee report. And Vice Chair Judy would be able to answer any questions if you have any about the Discipline Committee report. Thank you. Seeing none. Executive Committee, and any questions about the Executive Committee for Harinder or Dan? Finance, Audit, and Risk Committee. Any questions for Mark Eckler? Fitness to Practice Committee. Any questions for Peter Deline? Governance Committee. Any questions for Anne? Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports Committee. Any questions for Aaron Walker? Patient Relations Committee. Any questions for Vivian Hu? Pension Governance Committee. Any questions for Jamie? Professional Liability Program Committee. Any questions for Jamie? Quality Assurance Committee. Any questions for Nancy DeSanto? And Registration Committee. Any questions for Hillary Bauer in place of Osama? Okay, thank you very much, Council. What I would like to do at this point in time is, Harinder, your hand is up.
Hannah, carry on, you finish and then give me a second to conclude.
Okay, I would be happy.
Thank you.
So we have completed our agenda for today's meeting. A reminder that our next council meeting will be a hybrid meeting held on Friday. And again, I want you to highlight that it's on a Friday and not a Thursday. So it's going to be held on Friday, September 20th, 2024. It is a full day meeting. If you are attending in person, the meeting will be at Vantage Venues, 150 King Street West, and the meeting will be live streamed as usual. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Council for their work today, for their participation today. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank staff, those of you whose faces we can see and whose names appear on our screen, for all the incredible work you do behind the scenes in preparing for today's meeting. I would also like to take this opportunity for staff whose faces and names do not appear on the screen for all the work that they do on our behalf. So thank you very much for that. And now, Harinder, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Hannah. First of all, I want to thank you for running a very efficient meeting and taking everybody into discussion. It is not an easy job. Thank you again. I want to thank the staff. I want to thank the public members who have been watching us on YouTube channel and our council members. Thank you so much and I mean, all the passionate views you expressed about what is important to you or matters to you and matters to your constituencies. Thank you for that. I just want to again add that governance committee's work is ongoing. I am very sure that all the passionate views you expressed have been taken in, and they'll be working hard on seeking solutions to those issues. And we'll come back with another report, and hopefully we will have a better alignment of the council in September meeting. This is an ongoing work. We need to know a little bit more about our regulatory responsibilities and governance environment at this point in time, and where other colleges are going. So let's keep an open mind and let them do some more work based on our suggestions. And thank you again, and Hanno, back to you.
Thank you. And I would like to entertain the final motion of today's meeting. If I could have a motion to adjourn the meeting, moved by Anthony Lisho, seconded by Mark Trudell. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you. So I wish you all a good afternoon. Although I do understand, I think one of the council members is zooming in from Portugal. So I guess we're wishing you a good evening. But for those of us in the end, I guess for Dan and Andrea, it's probably good late afternoon. But thank you again all for your attendance today. And Dan, did you have something you wanted to say? Okay. But thank you for your attendance today. Thank you for your hard work. Have a wonderful summer, and we will see you all in September, either in person in Toronto or online. Thank you.
Thanks, Hanno.